looking relaxed. What does Miss Bright Moon plan to do in the future? Would you like to return with me to the Divine Realm? I will definitely go back. In the past when I was asking all around for Mystic Realms, I didn't have many lucky chances. But, I did accidentally obtain an ancient Asura command. With this token I was able to enter the Asura road to adventure and temper myself as well as avoid being hunted down by Tiun Mingzi. His presence was simply too terrifying. I feared that if I stayed in the Divine Realm I would eventually be found by him. Tiun Mingzi's character was cruel and cunning, and he also had the support of the Skydark Holy Lands. If he didn't hesitate to spend any price to find Mo Bright Moon, then it wouldn't have been strange for him to eventually find her. After all, her cultivation had been extremely low at the time, and as she constantly cultivated and constantly searched for lucky chances, she would likely have exposed clues about herself. As long as Tiun Mingzi was able to locate her approximate position, then no matter how well Mo Bright Moon concealed herself, she still wouldn't have been able to find the truth from Tiun Mingzi's eyes. This point was different from Mo River Bliss. Originally, Tiun Mingzi didn't know that the Verdant Feather Holy Lands had left behind Carefree Island as their emergency contingency. Moreover, Mo River Bliss was old and her potential was exhausted, so she didn't need to leave to search for lucky chances and could quietly live in seclusion. As long as she didn't expose herself, then no matter how smart Tiun Mingzi was, he still wouldn't find her. So Miss Bright Moon had an Asura command. Before Lin Ming entered the Asura Road, Empire Ian Divine Dream had told Lin Ming there were two ways to enter the Asura Road. One way was to have an Empire Ian help and forcefully reform one of the spatial channels that had been destroyed in the Great Calamity 3.6 billion years ago. The second way was to obtain an Asura command. Asura commands originated from the Asura Road. Before the Great Calamity in the Divine Realm 3.6 billion years ago, it was possible to find many Asura commands wandering about the Divine Realm. If one could find an Asura command, then one didn't need to form a transmission channel and could use the Asura command to directly enter the Asura Road. Moreover, this Asura command was one of the items needed to return to the Divine Realm. Mo Bright Moon had an Asura command so she could leave and enter the Asura Road as she pleased. Of course, using it required a massive amount of origin energy runes each time, an amount most martial artists couldn't afford to pay. Then what does Miss Mo have planned for the near future? Do you plan to stay in the Marvel Blue Nation and help Lord Snow ascend the throne? Mo Bright Moon nodded. When I was being hunted down by high-level figures of Heaven's Net, Lord Snow and Eunuch Liang helped me a great deal. On principle alone, I cannot leave like this. I have to return the favor. Even if I cannot help Lord Snow ascend the throne, I at least can keep him from being persecuted by Lord Shen. Millimeter, Lin Ming thought for a moment. It was reasonable for Mo Bright Moon to do this, but he didn't plan to involve himself in the imperial struggle. Lin Ming had already accomplished his goal, so he could leave the Marvel Blue Nation whenever he pleased. As for who became emperor, that wasn't related to him at all. However, Mo Bright Moon was currently wounded, so he couldn't leave immediately. He had to stay and protect her for some time until her full World King strength was restored. Once that happened, then even the high-level figures of Heaven's Net wouldn't be able to do anything to her. Thinking of this, Lin Ming's thoughts stirred. I'm also curious about something else. Why would those from Heaven's Net have such an unending grudge with Miss Bright Moon? And, did that missing big boss really leave behind something with Miss Bright Moon? If there is some secret involved, then Miss Bright Moon need not reply. I'm only randomly asking. Mo Bright Moon gently smiled. There is nothing that cannot be said. Since you are someone Big Sister trusts, I will naturally trust you too. The big boss of Heaven's Net is also called Heaven's Net. The name of Heaven's Net is one that reverberates like thunder in the ears of those in the world of assassins. But, there are actually few people, including myself, who know Heaven's Net is a woman. Listening to Mo Bright Moon's words, Lin Ming was left secretly stumbled. According to what he knew, Heaven's Net was one of the top-ranked assassin organizations, and its big boss was a woman with a great World King cultivation. She was someone who had founded an assassin organization that struck fear in the hearts of others. It was hard to imagine just what life she had experienced. Unless she had an entire book of stories, it was impossible for her to arrive at this step. Mo Bright Moon continued. The reason I joined the Heaven's Net assassin organization in the past was because when I was adventuring through a mystic realm in the Asura Road, I happened to accidentally save the life of a severely wounded Heaven's Net, thus she and I became as close as sisters. Heaven's Net trusted few people and I was one of them. Heaven's Net knew that I had a deep and profound blood enmity with someone, thus before she left she gave me something. She told me that if she didn't return, then I should leave the Heaven's Net organization and make good use of this item, find a lucky chance and then return to the Divine Realm to avenge my hatreds. As Mo Bright Moon spoke to her, Lin Ming was startled. It seemed that he had underestimated the value of whatever it was that Heaven's Net had left behind. He originally thought that whatever it was that a great World King left behind, no matter how precious it might be, would not be able to tempt an Empire Ian. But listening to what Mo Bright Moon was saying, if this thing was able to give her the opportunity to find a lucky chance that could allow her to kill Tiun Mingzi, it must be something far more extraordinary. Lin Ming said, Tiun Mingzi was already a peak great World King. The disparity between him and Miss Bright Moon was not small at all. If there was a lucky chance capable of overcoming this difference, then I fear even Empire Ians would be tempted. Listening to Lin Ming, Mo Bright Moon bitterly smiled and shook her head. How could it be so easy? The thing that Heaven's Net left behind represents a lucky chance, and one could even call it the greatest lucky chance of the entire Asura Road. But, it is something I cannot obtain. I am well aware of my own abilities. If I were to use this thing, chances are I would waste it. Mo Bright Moon sighed. The truth was that Mo Bright Moon had an extremely high level of talent. Although she was inferior to the peerless genius that was Mo Eversnow, she was still able to cultivate to the World King realm and even had hopes of becoming a great World King in the future. This was also the standard of an upper Empyrean descendant. Most Empyrean descendants would end up as ordinary World Kings. Those that were able to become great World Kings were outstanding individuals amongst them. The great lucky chance in the Asura Road. That would be. Lin Ming said, surprised. He could faintly guess just what it was. If it was something that could be called the greatest lucky chance in the Asura Road as well as something that no one could obtain, then there was only one thing that matched. Yes, it is the qualifications to enter the final trial. Mo Bright Moon's words confirmed Lin Ming's speculations. The young heroic elites of the 33 heavens would enter the Asura Road, completing all sorts of dangerous missions, venturing into numerous dangerous situations filled with perils, collect complete sets of god runes, and fulfill conditions required by the Asura Road's heavenly Tao. All of this was to struggle for the qualifications to enter the final trial. And, the Asura Road's final trial was left behind by the Asura Road Master. Through this smelting trial, one would obtain rewards from the Asura Road's heavenly Tao. However, the difficulty of this final trial was above and beyond all imagination. Wanting to complete it was impossibly difficult. When Lin Ming had asked Soul White about the final trial, he had said that in the last 100 million years, there were only 2 people who had completed the final trial with a score above 80%. One of these was a Saint race martial artist and the other was a Soul race martial artist, one man, and one woman. The Saint martial artist was Lin Ming's great enemy, the good fortune Saint Sun Bumo. He had completed the final trial with an 81% score. As for that Spiritas woman, she was even more terrifying. She had completed the final trial with an 83% score. This was the highest record for the last 100 million years. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1592 Healing Wounds. Chapter 1592 Healing Wounds. The reason that Lin Ming came to the Asura Road was also to enter the final trial. He wasn't sure just how much of the final trial he could complete. In completing the final trial, every 5% was a small leap and every 10% was a massive jump. In the last 100 million years, out of all the innumerable young geniuses that had ventured into the Asura Road from all over the 33 heavens, including all of the countless martial artists that were native to the Asura Road, when all of these people were added together, only 2 people had managed to surpass 80% in completion. Then, there was still 85%, 90%, and even 95%. Every higher grade meant a massive leap in difficulty. Lin Ming's advantage, besides his own talent, was that no one could compete with his understanding of the Asura Heavenly Tao. By relying on this, he was greatly anticipating the final trial. However, in order to enter the final trial there was something he had to inevitably do. This was to experience numerous trials within the Asura Road, obtain multiple sets of god runes, and then complete all sorts of other conditions. And obtaining these god runes and satisfying all the conditions of the Asura Road was not easy at all. Sometimes these conditions would even change and one would need to search for them. At novel being at. In addition, some missions required a specific amount of time to complete. For instance, some missions were within mystic realms but these mystic realms only opened every 10 years, so one might need to wait 10 years for the chance to enter. And for these mystic realms that had missions, sometimes they were too far away and their entrance location was always changing, so entering them wasn't Easy. Even after finding the way in after great difficulty, one could still perish if their strength was lacking. In short, one needed to invest a massive amount of time and energy to obtain the qualifications for the final trial. To someone like Lin Ming, although he was strong, his talent was high and completing these missions wasn't too difficult, what he lacked was time. The great calamity of humanity could erupt at any moment and he also had a duel against the good fortune Saint Sun that he had sworn to fight within 100 years. Now, he had to cultivate the essence gathering system as well as prepare to further open the 9 stars of the Dao Palace, that required him to practice the divine runic arts and alchemy. To him, time was of the essence. When Mo Bright Moon mentioned the qualifications for the final smelting trial, Lin Ming's thoughts inevitably stirred. But for a time, Lin Ming didn't open his mouth due to his embarrassment about asking of this matter. Luckily, Mo Bright Moon could see Lin Ming's thoughts. She gently smiled and said, the final trial qualifications could be said to be for one person, but the truth is that within the Asura Road there is a type of collective transmission God Rune. With this God Rune, there can be a total of 5 people who enter the final trial together, forming a squad. Many young elites that enter the final trial form a team to continue onwards. If you wish, then when the true final trial begins I can bring you with me. With you, I'm sure that these final trial qualifications will not be wasted. Lin Ming was someone that Mo Eversnow had chosen, and the development of his strength was far more important than Mo Bright Moon's strength. Moreover, Mo Bright Moon was well aware that becoming a great world king was her limit. As for Lin Ming, his future was limitless. Lin Ming was the most suitable candidate to join these final trial qualifications. Then I really must thank you. I really do need these qualifications. Moreover, Lin Ming's words lingered as he awkwardly turned to Xiao Moxian not too far away. As Lin Ming and Mo Bright Moon were talking, Xiao Moxian had been peacefully sitting near a window, not interrupting them. For Lin Ming to turn towards Xiao Moxian at this time, he clearly wanted to ask Mo Bright Moon whether or not she could also bring Xiao Moxian along. Mo Bright Moon chuckled. I indeed had a candidate in mind, but no matter how good that candidate is they still cannot compare with your Dao companion. I must say, I also don't know Miss Name, I'm quite ashamed of myself. At the start, Mo Bright Moon didn't place too much importance on Lin Ming, only on the imaginary master that stood behind him. As for the young girl that followed Lin Ming, she had regarded her as Lin Ming's partner and thus didn't pay too much attention to her, not even asking for her name. Xiao Moxian didn't care too much about it. She clucked her tongue and happily said, my name is Jixianua, but you can call me Xianua. Jixianua, millimeter, that's a good name. Then, Xianua, Lin Ming, I, as well as 2 others I chose before, will be the 5 people to attend the final trial. Although it is said that we form a team, the trial will look further into our individual talent the further in we go. So Lin Ming, Xianua, you 2 must display your talent to your limits. Miss Bright Moon, please rest assured that I will not disappoint you for choosing us for those 2 spots. Lin Ming solemnly said. He was sufficiently confident in himself as well as filled with expectations. Speaking of which, when can we enter the final trial? The final trial occurs every 100 years. Until the next opening of the final trial, there is still 50 years. 50 years. Lin Ming was stunned. This time had exceeded his expectations. He had only lived for 50-some years so far. If another 50 years passed, then he would almost be twice as old. You think that's too long? Mo Bright Moon said, seeing Lin Ming's expression. In the Asura Road, young elites came to adventure for a long time. On the shorter end it would be hundreds of years and on the longer end it could be thousands or even 10,000 years. There were even some people that never managed to leave after coming here. In reality, 50 years wasn't anything at all. I'm good. Lin Ming quickly composed himself. He could wait for 50 years and there were also many matters he needed to attend to during this period that required a massive amount of time. For instance, practicing the Celestial Tyrant Manual, collecting the heavenly materials needed to open the 9 stars of the Dao Palace, practicing divine runic arts and alchemy, all of this required him to study them in detail. Moreover, his cultivation had risen too quickly in Tragic Death Valley. He required some time to digest all of his accumulations and consolidate his own foundation. He had to do this sooner or later otherwise he would encounter bottlenecks when he was trying to rise to the next cultivation boundary. These 50 years would be an essential part of Lin Ming's accumulation process. As for Lin Ming's battle with the good fortune Saint Sun, he originally had 100 years of time. If 50 years were deducted he still had plenty of time to return. Although Lin Ming had stayed in Tragic Death Valley for 9 years, that was time spent within a time enchantment, the truth was that only a year had passed outside. Good, I'll wait 50 years and then go to this final trial. Lin Ming decided. In these 50 years he would have to consolidate and accumulate his cultivation in the essence gathering system as well as make another breakthrough in the 9 stars of the Dao Palace. Thus, Lin Ming and Mo Bright Moon shared sound transmission marks and settled on a meeting approximately 50 years from now. Miss Bright Moon, I will leave the Marble Blue Nation soon. This struggle for the throne isn't something I will participate in. Besides White Sky, how many enemies does Miss Bright Moon have? After your recovery, will you be able to handle them yourself? The final trial qualifications could be used for a team of 5 to participate. If it was only White Sky who wanted to enter then he could simply give Mo Bright Moon some advantages and join her team. But, he insisted on taking away the final trial qualifications, proving that he had a partner or had even gathered an entire team of 5. There are 4 or 5, but as long as I've recovered I'll be fine. I don't fear them at all. Mo Bright Moon had mixed in within the Asura Road and an assassin organization for so many years and had experienced numerous dangers and life or death slaughters. If she couldn't overcome this tribulation, then there was no way she could have lived this long. Great, then let me assist you in healing your wounds now. I feel that there is more than one type of Dao pattern left behind in your body. Lin Ming had probed Mo Bright Moon's physical condition with his sense and discovered that within her inner world, several types of Asura Dao patterns had been left behind. These Dao patterns represented the heavenly Dao laws of the Asura Road. If one didn't understand the Asura heavenly Dao, then they would be extremely difficult to expel, no matter how high their cultivation. Millimeter, these are traces from tracking God runes, they aren't the divine runic arts. Can you undo them? In the Asura Road, some God runes had special effects. For instance, transmitting teammates, tracking enemies, controlling slaves, and so forth. Many people would use these as supportive arcane skills. When Lin Ming controlled Soul White, he had also used a controlling God rune. I'll give it a try, Lin Ming said, not giving any absolute assurances. He pointed towards a bed in the room and motioned for Mo Bright Moon to lie down. The bed was covered with red silks. As Mo Bright Moon lay down on the bed, her long red skirt spread out like a rose in full bloom. Lin Ming hesitated for a moment. Then, he extended his hands and pressed them against Mo Bright Moon's belly. Mo Bright Moon originally wore a short, tight-fitting bustier that revealed her lower belly. Her skin seemed smooth to the touch, like soft jade. An essence-gathering system martial artist's inner world was located at their lower abdomen. This was also where a person's dungeon was. At this time, Lin Ming's mind was as still as a placid lake, without a single distracting thought. He sunk his divine sense into Mo Bright Moon's inner world, investigating every Dao pattern, locking onto their positions, remembering their structure and textures. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters.
My hatred is too low. I must wait long. I must heal. I require aid.
Martial World. Chapter 1593 Blue Moon Sect. Chapter 1593 Blue Moon Sect. The God runes of the Asura Road were originally a manifestation of the Asura Heavenly Dao. Lin Ming relied on his comprehension of the Asura Sutra first volume to slowly change the positions of these Asura Dao patterns. These Dao patterns existed within Mo Bright Moon's inner world as threads of energy. After a long time passed, these threads of energy would eventually melt away until they vanished altogether. But now, they couldn't afford the time and had to clear out these threads as soon as possible. Lin Ming found a thread of energy and said to Mo Bright Moon, I'm going to start. This may hurt. Every energy thread of Dao patterns had sunk into Mo Bright Moon's flesh and blood. Wanting to pull them out was the same as drawing out an extremely tough string from someone's body. There would be a considerable amount of pain. If a mortal had to withstand this pain, they would immediately faint. Martial artists had a far higher pain tolerance than mortals did. But, their bodies were far more solid, so pulling out these energy threads was also much more difficult and painful. As Lin Ming locked onto an energy thread with his own energy and began to pull it out, Mo Bright Moon violently shook. Small bumps began to appear where Lin Ming's hand touched her abdomen. Lin Ming couldn't help but slow down a little. Continue. Mo Bright Moon grit her teeth. Growing up until now, she had experienced many hardships and tribulations. To her, this pain couldn't be considered anything at all. Lin Ming nodded. He twined a finger around the energy thread and began to pull it outwards. His actions were extremely gentle. But even so, the pain caused by these heavenly Dao traces flooded her with pain like an endless tsunami. Waves of agonizing pain smashed into Mo Bright Moon's spiritual sea. Although she didn't say anything, her entire body was soaked with sweat, making her seem even more enchanting. Lin Ming was completely focused on the task at hand. In a quarter hour, the energy thread that formed a complex heavenly Dao trace was finally pulled out. As soon as this energy thread was completely pulled out into the air, it disappeared in a flash of light. Lin Ming didn't stop here. He began to pull out a second one. Then, a third and a fourth. After 2 whole hours of time, Lin Ming had completely cleared out all traces of the heavenly Dao. And at this time, Mo Bright Moon's body was dripping sweat, her face was white, and her lips had lost all color. She appeared extremely fragile right now. Lin Ming let out a long breath of relief. This process had consumed a great deal of energy. Finally, the great Dao scars within Mo Bright Moon's body were all eliminated and no one would be able to track down her position again. All that was left over was the unliving poison that still pervaded her body. But with Mo Bright Moon's strength and in a situation where she wasn't restricted by those great Dao scars, driving out the rest of the poison should only take several more days. We're good here. Miss Bright Moon, I will return to my room first. 10 days from now I will leave, and the next time we meet again might be 50 years from now. Mo Bright Moon weakly nodded. As she looked into her own inner world, she saw that it was just like Lin Ming had said. The great Dao scars within her body had all been cleared out by him. This caused Mo Bright Moon to fall into even greater disbelief. Those scars were something that not even old Su had been able to do anything about. His only suggestion was for her to wait 4 years and allow the energy in those scars to slowly fade away until they vanished. But Lin Ming had only used 2 hours to clean up all of them. It was far too amazing. 50 years from now. I'll see you then. Mo Bright Moon ruefully smiled. She also planned to leave Heaven's Net. Within Heaven's Net, the only person she was close with was the big boss. But now, she had disappeared, gone to fulfill a wish she had for her entire life, and it wasn't known whether she was still alive. With that, there wasn't anything in the whole of Heaven's Net that Mo Bright Moon wasn't too reluctant to part ways with. 10 days later, Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian left the Marvel Blue Nation. In these 10 days, Lord Snow had heard news of what had happened and repeatedly visited Lin Ming to form relations with him. However, Lin Ming refused him every time. Lin Ming didn't need to be a genius to know just what Lord Snow wanted, and that was for Lin Ming to assist him in ascending the throne. But Lin Ming wasn't interested in involving himself in the struggles and strife of the Imperial Palace, thus he directly and simply refused all attempts to pull him in. Lord Snow was also helpless in this matter. He had no choice but to give up. In these 10 days, Lin Ming had carefully crafted his plan for the next 50 years. Besides consolidating his foundation and accumulating his cultivation, he decided to make the 9 stars of the Dao Palace his main cultivation focus. And in order to open the second Dao Palace of the 9 stars of the Dao Palace, he had to refine an extremely rare and precious pill of the Celestial Tyrant Manual, the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill. This type of pill required many rare and precious heavenly materials. Moreover, there were extremely strict standards required of the alchemist who was refining it. This was something that was impossible to buy and could even be called an utterly priceless medicine with no market price. In order to refine this pill, Lin Ming would have to begin by collecting all the materials and then refining it himself. At novel bean at. Without a doubt, this would consume a disgusting amount of time and energy. But no matter how much time Lin Ming had to spend, he would still complete it. To him, the body transformation technique was in no way less important to him than the essence gathering system. So, Lin Ming returned to Divine Rune City, and with his status as a member of the Divine Runic Masters Guild, he used the highest 15% discount to buy up a pile of materials as large as a mountain. The total price of these materials could leave one panic-stricken. Lin Ming spent just over 209 sun jades. In the past, Lin Ming had inherited a massive amount of wealth within Primordia's Heavenly Palace. But after being chased down by Tian Mingzi in the Asura Road and also freely spending so much money in Divine Rune City, Lin Ming's wealth had shrunk down to a precipitous state. He had less than 59 sun jades remaining. Lin Ming couldn't help but forcefully smile. No matter how rich he was, he still couldn't continue spending money like he was dumping water without having any income at all. As for practicing alchemy and the Divine Runic Arts, Lin Ming didn't plan to do so in the Divine Runic Masters Guild. This was because Lin Ming didn't need a master and could practice by himself. Compared to the bustling Divine Rune City that had countless transactions happening within its borders every day, Lin Ming preferred a calmer, more peaceful place. Only this type of place best suited Lin Ming's mindset to practice the Divine Runic Arts and alchemy, as well as hone his cultivation and stabilize his foundation in preparation for the future when he was finally ready to break into the Holy Lord realm. Thus, after buying all the materials he needed, Lin Ming rode Primordia's Heavenly Palace, which was camouflaged as a spirit ship, and flew away from Divine Rune City. He flew for half a month. The Asura Road was a universe that coexisted with the 33 heavens. In terms of actual area, it wasn't as large as one of the 33 heavens, but a great world of the divine realm still couldn't compare to it in size. As Primordia's Heavenly Palace flew for half a month, Lin Ming saw countless countries and countless lives. Within the Asura Road, races from all over the 33 heavens could be found. There were also many people that were of mixed blood. There were more people than there were grains of sand in a desert. In order to count them, one would have to use trillions as the lowest base unit. With so many lives, there were also innumerable sects. The Blue Moon sect was one of the innumerable large and small sects located within the inner Asura Road. It was an extremely common sect. If one judged the Blue Moon sect by the standards of the divine realm, then it would only be a 7th grade sect. The supreme rulers of the sect were the sect master and the highest elder. Both of them were at the divine lord realm, and only the 2 of them were divine lords. Everyone else was below the divine lord realm. Of these 2 people, the highest elder was 80,000 years old and at the middle divine lord realm. The sect master was 50,000 years old and at the early divine lord realm. 2 divine lord realm powerhouses that lived less than 100,000 years. 50,000 years could be called middle-aged and 80,000 years could be called an extremely old age, nearing the point of death. On this day, an extremely handsome young man and beautiful young woman came to the Blue Moon sect, wanting to join. As for that young man, he claimed to be a low-level divine runic master and alchemist. Both of them were extremely young, but their talent was outstanding. Even though they were only several dozen years old, they had already cultivated to the late divine sea realm. To the Blue Moon sect, these were 2 extremely wonderful seedlings. In the future they would reach the divine transformation realm and even have a chance of cultivating to the divine lord realm. Thus, the elders of the Blue Moon sect personally welcomed these two people. After investigating their background, they were placed as inner court disciples. The numerous elders were highly satisfied with these two people's talent. As for the young man being a low-level divine runic master and alchemist, they didn't care about this too much. They were only a small sect, so wanting to raise a divine runic high master was far beyond their league. If a martial artist wanted to become a truly valuable divine runic master, they needed to spend a massive amount of rare and precious materials. This was not something that the Blue Moon sect could withstand. The two strongest martial artists in the Blue Moon sect were merely divine lord powerhouses, so how much wealth could they have? Like this, the young man and woman settled down in the Blue Moon sect. These two people were naturally Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian. After Lin Ming finished his final considerations and plans, he chose this small sect to spend the first 20 to 30 years. This was a purer place with a simpler atmosphere. He could live in peace here and practice his alchemy and divine runic arts while furthering his own cultivation. As for Xiao Moxian, she certainly decided to join Lin Ming. During her 9 years in Tragic Death Valley, her cultivation had risen far too fast. She needed time to consolidate it. Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian suppressed their cultivation to the late Divine Sea realm. Of course, deceiving the people of the Blue Moon sect wasn't a problem at all. Lin Ming didn't do as many other disciples did when they joined the sect and started cultivating. Rather, after he moved in, he remodeled his own dwelling area so that there was a divine runic arts room and an alchemy room. Higher-level divine runic masters often constructed divine runic arts rooms that cost an astronomical price. As for Lin Ming, his room was far more normal and basic, he simply needed to make do. As a sect elder saw this situation and discovered that Lin Ming was indeed planning to practice the divine runic arts and alchemy, he immediately came to persuade Lin Ming to change his mind. He didn't want Lin Ming to delay his cultivation for too long because of the divine runic arts and go astray, wasting away his own talent and time. But Lin Ming only smiled, clearly unconvinced. One's road of cultivation all depended on the individual, no one else could change their mind. If Lin Ming wished to take one path, there was nothing the elders could do. They could only allow Lin Ming to do as he pleased. Thus, within the Blue Moon sect, Lin Ming began his peaceful days of seclusion. Every day he would thoroughly study the divine runic arts and alchemy. At night, he would meditate in his room, sometimes accumulating his cultivation, sometimes practicing heavenly extreme bliss with Xiao Moxian. As the days passed, Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian's strength slowly consolidated. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1594 Quiet Training. Chapter 1594 Quiet Training. News of Lin Ming establishing his own divine runic arts room and an alchemy room soon spread throughout the entire Blue Moon sect. This was extremely fresh and novel news. In the Asura Road, alchemists were not rare, but the occupation of divine runic master was considered a noble career throughout the entire Asura Road. Divine runic masters would only gather in peak great influences as well as large cities devoted to the divine runic arts like Divine Rune City. But to the Blue Moon sect, these peak great influences were simply legends amongst legends, it was impossible for them to ever come into contact with them. As for Divine Rune City, only the most amazing elites of the Blue Moon sect were able to enter, ordinary disciples wouldn't even be able to step past the city gates. Thus, the occupation of Divine Runic Master was something that the disciples of the Blue Moon sect had only heard of but had never seen before. As they suddenly heard that a Divine Runic Master had appeared in their sect, all of them ran over to Lin Ming's residence to take a look and see just what a Divine Runic Master looked like and what type of work they did. However, this disciple called Lin Ming didn't seem willing to communicate with others. When the average person entered his residence, he would actually remain in his alchemy room or divine runic arts room, tinkering with something, without any intention of coming out to greet guests. Even if he wasn't refining pills or practicing divine runic arts, he would often be quietly meditating in his room. Or, he would sometimes be holding a blood-red jade slip. This jade slip was extremely strange. It was far larger than an ordinary jade slip and had a very heavy and solemn appearance to it. It was unknown just what was recorded within it. This youth called Lin Ming would look at this jade slip every day. His straight eyebrows often rose up and wrinkled like he was puzzled. But sometimes he would have an extremely happy appearance as if he was suddenly enlightened. These actions left his visiting guests feeling awkward and embarrassed. Others asked Lin Ming how he had come into contact with the divine runic arts, what his divine runic arts level was, or whether he had a true divine runic arts master as his teacher. But, Lin Ming either remained silent or immersed in his blood-red jade slip, without seeming as if he heard anything at all. This caused those disciples that were extremely interested in the divine runic arts to feel snubbed, as if they were making themselves unwelcome. There were many female disciples within the Blue Moon sect. Many of these young girls were well known for their beauty within several 100,000 or even millions of miles. However, no matter how outstanding their appearance or how amazing their talent was, they were all denied by Lin Ming. Slowly, no one came to visit Lin Ming anymore. And Lin Ming also began his quiet days of training. After practicing martial arts for so many years, Lin Ming had never been like he was today, truly settling down his mind and heart, not needing to think about matters or worrying every day. Instead, he calmly and peacefully trained. With Xiao Moxian, they were like an ordinary mortal couple. Every day was filled with ease and enjoyment. Here there were no battles, no dangers, no mystic realms that he had to risk his life in, and no people with dark intentions that coveted his treasures. Life and death dangers and slaughter battles were undoubtedly helpful for making breakthroughs in cultivation. But to practice the divine runic arts and accumulate cultivation, a peaceful environment was much more suitable. Many heroic young elites often spent several thousand years or even over 10,000 years to break into the Divine Lord realm. Of these thousands upon thousands of years, only a minor period of time would be spent searching for lucky chances and adventuring through dangers. Most of the time would be spent tempering one's state of mind and accumulating one's cultivation and consolidating one's foundation. This was the life Lin Ming was living now. Although his cultivation progressed extremely slowly during this time, this was an essential process of walking down the road of martial arts. All martial artists had to experience it and Lin Ming was no exception. Spring became autumn and then back again. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. If Lin Ming wasn't practicing the divine runic arts or alchemy, he could be found with that blood-red jade slip in his hands. This jade slip was the 9 stars of the Dao Palace section of the Celestial Tyrant Manual. As Lin Ming was reading through this jade slip, he didn't conceal anything. This was because no one would be able to recognize anything about this jade slip to begin with. After diligently meditating for a year, Lin Ming gradually found clues about refining the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill. Of the 9 stars of the Dao Palace, the second Dao Palace corresponded to the Ravenous Wolf Star. The 9 stars of the Dao Palace, 7 bright and 2 dark. They were Ravenous Wolf, Titan Gate, Cherished Kismet, Merciful Song, Ardent Virtue, Martial Song, Army Breaker, Left Aid, and Right Support. The first Dao Palace that Lin Ming opened was the Purple Temple Dao Palace, corresponding to the Army Breaker Star. The function of the Purple Temple Dao Palace was to gather the power of the 9 stars and massively increase the strength of Lin Ming's astral essence. This sort of increase could enhance Lin Ming's bodily strength by 3 or 4 times to 8 or 9 times. All of this depended on a martial artist's own foundation and the degree to which they had opened the 9 stars of the Dao Palace. As for the second Dao Palace, that was named Heavenly Retribution Dao Palace, and corresponded to the Ravenous Wolf Star. Lin Ming revolved his astral essence every day according to the Celestial Tyrant Manual. In addition to dual cultivating with Xiao Moxian, Lin Ming estimated that in another 20 to 30 years, he would finally reach the level where he could attempt to break into the Heavenly Retribution Dao Palace. And in these 20 to 30 years, Lin Ming had to bring his divine runic arts and alchemy up to the level where he could refine the Ravenous Wolf Heavenly Pill. Otherwise, if he spent an unimaginable amount of wealth and time to collect the materials for the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill but failed in refining it, that would truly be a hopelessness beyond crying. Although there seemed to be plenty of time with the opening of the final trial being 50 years from now, the truth was that time was of the essence. There were far too many matters for Lin Ming to process. Like this, a few more years passed. Lin Ming continuously practiced alchemy and the divine runic arts. The massive amount of materials he had purchased from Divine Rune City was slowly used up. His skill in the divine runic arts and alchemy also steadily increased. During this time, Lin Ming refined a mind-boggling amount of low-level pills and divine runic symbols. At a novel being at. Lin Ming's soul force far surpassed that of others at his level. In addition to his understanding of the Asura Heavenly Dao, whether it was refining pills or drawing up divine runic symbols, he was much faster than the average person would be. However, even though Lin Ming had inherited the memories of 3 alchemists and divine runic masters, this didn't mean his alchemy technique and divine runic arts technique was flawless. On this day, as Lin Ming was halfway through refining a furnace full of pills, there was a massive bang as the entire pill furnace exploded. Even though Lin Ming reacted extremely fast, half the room still collapsed. The carefully arranged alchemy room was also left in an utter mess. As a divine transformation outer court elder of the Blue Moon sect heard this news, he quickly went to personally check it out. He inspected Lin Ming's body. Then, after making sure that Lin Ming was uninjured, he gave him several words of advice. In short, he hinted that Lin Ming need not worry about such useless things and only needed to practice martial arts. That was the true, orthodox path. In the eyes of these numerous elders, experimenting with alchemy and divine runic arts was simply a wasteful occupation where one idled their time away. This was because with Lin Ming's current conditions it would be impossible for him to make any progress. Moreover, the divine runic arts had too high a requirement on a martial artist's talent. Almost only Spiritas martial artists were able to be divine runic masters. For a human martial artist to become a divine runic master, that was far too difficult. To put it rudely, it was the dreams of a fool. But Lin Ming didn't heed the advice of the elder and the elder couldn't force him. After all, if Lin Ming joined the Blue Moon sect, he could also leave. If they wanted to retain the minds and hearts of people, they needed to give them more freedom. The Blue Moon sect elder sent a low-level disciple to clean up the room. Soon, 3 outer court disciples came to Lin Ming's residence to clean his room. These outer court disciples were in their teens and their cultivation was at the pulse condensation realm. They had just joined the Blue Moon sect and had been chosen from the mortal world. In the Blue Moon sect, their status was low. Although they were called outer court disciples, the truth was that they weren't much different from maids. Lin Ming glanced at these 3 female disciples. All of them looked naive and adorable, like lovely young girls. Lin Ming also knew that although these young girl disciples seemed to be living through many hardships, the truth was that their families were proud to have daughters who managed to pass the standards to join a large martial arts sect. The family and friends of these young girls were filled with pride and joy, and even the royalty of the mortal world had to show courtesy to their parents. This was the deterrence brought about by a martial arts sect. However, the road of martial arts was well known as being extremely rough and filled with bumps. Although the families of these young girls were living bright and glorious lives, who knew what would happen to their daughters in the end? Perhaps they might be abducted by others to become living furnaces, or perhaps after a little bit of success they would perish in a mystic realm, or perhaps they might even be murdered for their possessions. Thinking of this, Lin Ming lightly sighed. In the past when he first stepped onto the road of martial arts, he also suffered many difficulties. Seeing the 3 young girls giving their best to clean up the room, Lin Ming's thoughts stirred. He waved his hand, beckoning them over. These young girls froze. Lin Ming was a core disciple and his cultivation had reached the late Divine Sea realm. To them, he was an impossibly lofty character. Their difference in status couldn't even be described as clouds and mud. Moreover, Lin Ming's manner was indifferent, and even when inner court disciples came to visit he still didn't respond to them. Even those amazingly talented and beautiful senior apprentice sisters had to eat closed doors when they tried to approach Lin Ming. But Lin Ming was actually calling them over. This made them all feel extremely flustered and flattered. They stepped over, a bit shy, a bit nervous. Lin Ming took out some bottles. The contents of these bottles were some of the pills that Lin Ming had refined over the past few years. As Lin Ming was practicing the divine runic arts and alchemy, he had produced far too many pills and divine runic symbols. To Lin Ming, these things didn't have any value at all. They weren't even worth his time or effort selling them. However, throwing them away was also a pity. Thus, Lin Ming suddenly had the idea to give these things to others. This was also for the benefit of the Blue Moon sect. After all, for these past years the Blue Moon sect had treated him considerably well. After determining that Lin Ming's background had no problems, the elders of the Blue Moon sect would send someone over to deliver pills, origin energy runes, and other such resources. To the Blue Moon sect that could be called for, these things were worth a good amount of wealth. These things were for the benefit of the inner court disciples. And because Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian had extremely high levels of talent, the benefits they received were higher than others. But, Lin Ming also knew that he would have to eventually leave the Blue Moon sect. If the Blue Moon sect was depending on him to break through to the Divine Lord realm and become a pillar of the sect, they would be disappointed. Thus, Lin Ming decided to give away all of these pills and divine runic symbols that didn't have much value to him to the disciples of the Blue Moon sect. The Blue Moon sect was a small sect to begin with and he didn't fear arousing suspicions or causing waves by bringing out these items. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Lin Ming could raise a sect of this level to the ground with a single hand. These are for you. Lin Ming placed the bottles of pills in a jade box and passed it to the 3 pulse condensation realm outer court disciples. These disciples were lost in a daze, not sure what was in the jade box. And at this time, Lin Ming said, "Go and call your sisters here as well as the male disciples you know. Call all of them here together." Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1595 Middle Divine Lord Realm. Chapter 1595 Middle Divine Lord Realm. The young female disciples received the jade box. From the slits of the jade box, a rich medicinal fragrance wafted out. Just by smelling this medicinal fragrance they felt their bodies relax as comfort swept over them. The true essence circulating within their bodies quickened and their cultivation sharpened by several degrees. If just smelling this medicinal fragrance had such an effect, then eating a pill directly would have an unimaginable benefit. The oldest of the 3 young girls gulped. Her hands trembled as she opened the medicine bottle and several green pills rolled out. These pills were crystalline and sparkled with a clear light. On the surface of the pills were strange lines, faintly hinting at the aura of mysterious laws. These lines that were carved onto the pills were pill symbols. The young girls had never seen these pill symbols before, they couldn't even recognize the names of most of these pills. However, Lin Ming had given them several types of pills, and the young girls were able to recognize one of them. This pill was called a 9-yong pill and was used by martial artists at the Xiontian realm or below. It was used to consolidate one's foundation and nourish one's blood vitality. Each 9-yong pill was several dozen times more precious than a single heaven-opening pill. The young girls had once seen the sect provide these pills for talented disciples and had nearly been blinded by awe and greed. Of course, they didn't have the qualifications to use them. These 9-yong pills that Lin Ming refined were different from the 9-yong pills they had seen before. These 9-yong pills had strange patterns on the surface, and seemingly because of these patterns, the effects of these pills were far better. These young girls didn't know that these pill patterns were in fact traces of the Asura heavenly laws left behind after Lin Ming reinforced them with the divine runic arts. To Lin Ming these were useless items, but if placed within the Blue Moon sect, these were treasures even to inner court disciples. These young girls were only outer court disciples, moreover, the effects of these pills were enhanced several times by the divine runic symbols drawn onto them. In these years, the direction of divine runic arts that Lin Ming practiced had mainly focused on medicinal runic symbols. Only these types of divine runic symbols had an effect on pills and thus were the most useful to Lin Ming. These medicines are too precious, we cannot accept them. The oldest girl, one that looked around 18 to 19 years old, grit her teeth as she spoke. The truth was that one could see from her expression that she really wanted these pills. Lin Ming faintly smiled. He had a much more favorable impression of this girl. It wasn't easy to gather the courage to reject such things. During these years, Lin Ming had watched the low-level disciples of the Blue Moon sect go into seclusion, journey out to adventure, rush about for resources, and do all sorts of other things. This made him recall his experiences when he was also in his teens. He lightly smiled, saying, "If I give them to you then take them. Or, are you afraid that the higher-level disciples will steal them from you?" Lin Ming was well aware that even though the Blue Moon sect seemed like a calm and comfortable place, there were still inevitably inner struggles. These 3 young girls had ordinary levels of talent and there would naturally be people jealous of these pills. For the things I give, I will naturally ensure justice is served. You can feel at ease in taking these pills. The 2 younger girls swallowed a gulp of saliva. Their hands shook as they held the pill bottles. "Call those you know here." Lin Ming sent out the young girls. Several quarter hours later, there were really several outer court disciples that arrived. These disciples were in their late teens or early 20s. None of them had a cultivation that surpassed the Xiantian realm. They had just started walking on their own roads of martial arts. For these last 4 or 5 years, every other day Lin Ming would refine a furnace full of pills. When he refined less there would be 7 or 8, and when he refined many there would be over a dozen. After accumulating pills for all these years, he had already gathered over 10,000 of them. And, these 10,000 plus pills were all supported with divine runic symbols. Placed within the Blue Moon sect, this was an unimaginable level of wealth. News of Lin Ming wantonly giving out pills soon spread to the entire Blue Moon sect. Many outer court disciple and inner court disciples only thought these were rumors, but after seeing the pills that Lin Ming passed out they had no choice but to believe this. Thus, disciples began to visit Lin Ming like droves of ducks. This was because his pills were far too tempting to them. However, to the inner court disciples, Lin Ming didn't give pills freely. Instead he had them gather some violet sun crystals. The price in violet sun crystals was only half or a third of the true value of the pills. This sort of price was already extremely favorable. Many inner court disciples didn't have a place to purchase pills and these pills were far too difficult to buy to begin with. Originally, Lin Ming wasn't too popular. This was because he was far too eccentric and withdrawn, ignoring all visitors that came to see him. But now, because Lin Ming was passing out pills, this caused his reputation to rise to unprecedented degrees within the Blue Moon sect. Where did these pills come from? Did you refine them? The elders of the Blue Moon sect were startled. Several of them came over to Lin Ming's residence to ask him. I obtained them through a variety of channels and some are refined by me. Lin Ming shrugged. This vague answer clearly indicated that he didn't wish to speak more about the matter. The Blue Moon sect elders were at a loss of what to do. In truth, it was completely reasonable for Lin Ming to refine these low-level pills. According to common logic, these pills could be refined by a late divine sea alchemist. But the low-level pills that Lin Ming refined were far too great. Not even the nearby famous alchemists were able to refine pills of similar quality. Had Lin Ming done all this by studying alone? Was he actually a rare prodigy of alchemy and the divine runic arts? The elders looked at each other. They didn't have any plans of pressing Lin Ming to reveal the origin of the pills. However, on the second day, the elders invited a family famous for constructing cave dwellings to the Blue Moon sect, where they constructed an expensive divine runic arts room and alchemy room for Lin Ming. The Blue Moon sect even helped Lin Ming by buying a great deal of alchemy materials for him. This was all welcomed by Lin Ming. Although these were all low-level materials, they were more than enough for Lin Ming to practice his technique. Time slowly passed. The seasons came and went, from spring to fall and back again. Lin Ming's skill in the divine runic arts and alchemy reached an increasingly high degree of proficiency. At novel being at. Now, what he pursued was not just quality in alchemy and divine runic arts, but speed. At the start, Lin Ming would refine a furnace of pills every 2 days. Now he would refine 2 furnaces of pills every single day. A massive amount of low-level pills was constantly produced by Lin Ming. Although Lin Ming was only giving away some of the inferior medicines he had refined, the quality of these medicines became increasingly high. Gradually, Lin Ming's reputation soared to the heavens. More and more disciples came to purchase pills from Lin Ming. There were even some nearby sects that would come to the Blue Moon sect to purchase pills. Of course, the price this time would rise to the market standard. Although the price of the pills was increasing, more and more people flocked to buy them. At this time, no one suspected Lin Ming of obtaining pills from various channels any longer. If so many pills were being sold and given out, then the only possibility was that Lin Ming refined them himself. The Blue Moon sect realized they had picked up a treasure. The income from selling pills went into Lin Ming's hands. Then, he handed this money over to the Blue Moon sect to have them seek out different materials. The materials Lin Ming wanted were of an increasingly high grade. The pills he refined also became increasingly refined. Of course, Lin Ming would not bring out pills that true Divine Lord or Holy Lord realm martial artists could use, in order to prevent some martial artists having dark thoughts. Lin Ming wasn't scared of them, but if they were to bother him it would be impossible for him to peacefully and calmly meditate here. Slowly, 12 years passed. The cultivation that Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian revealed was risen to the divine transformation realm. In the Blue Moon sect, Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian experienced the toil of daily life. Every now and then they would join the disciples of the Blue Moon sect to go out adventuring. For instance, exploring mystic realms, finishing missions, and so forth. By watching the slaughter and struggles of low-level martial artists, he actually found a strange feeling that he had almost forgotten. This odd feeling strangely touched Lin Ming's heart. And in the 13th year, as Lin Ming was calmly meditating one day he finally felt something stir within his inner world. He knew that his cultivation was about to make a breakthrough. From the early Divine Lord realm to the middle Divine Lord realm. This breakthrough didn't come suddenly at all. It could be called a simple matter of course. This was like filling a cup with wine, filling it so much that it naturally overflowed. And the scene of this breakthrough was extremely peaceful. In the past when Lin Ming made breakthroughs, they tended to shake the heavens and earth or be extremely thrilling, sometimes almost breaking apart his inner world. But, this breakthrough was tranquil, like a quiet spring day. Lin Ming only sat in meditation for the night and on the next day as he opened his eyes, his inner world had developed once more and his cultivation rose to the middle Divine Lord realm. Besides the sensitive Xiao Moxian feeling the change of atmosphere in the room, not even tiny animals in the surrounding area were alarmed. After 5 months Xiao Moxian also broke into the middle Divine Lord realm. She only cultivated the essence gathering system and her cultivation speed had been faster than Lin Ming's. If it wasn't for Lin Ming obtaining greater advantages during all the lucky chances they experienced, then perhaps Lin Ming's essence gathering system cultivation might have fallen behind Xiao Moxian's. After making a breakthrough, Lin Ming's strength rose once more. As for the level of Lin Ming's divine runic arts, it arrived at the standard of a peak 5th grade divine runic master. Moreover, even amongst ordinary 5th grade divine runic masters, Lin Ming had a special advantage, that was that no one could compare to his understandings of the Asura Heavenly Tao. And at this time, Lin Ming finally began his preparations to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill. In refining the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill, just collecting the required materials would take a tremendous amount of time. He had no choice but to prepare as early as possible. Just by breaking into the middle Divine Lord realm, Lin Ming's strength hadn't risen by too much. If he were able to open another Dao Palace then he would be much more confident in entering the final trial. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1596 Nirvana of the Mind. Chapter 1596 Nirvana of the Mind. At novel being at. Lin Ming, are you planning to start refining the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill? Xiao Moxian asked from the side. She watched as Lin Ming looked through the Celestial Tyrant manual for the last several days, seeming to be calculating something. It's good to make preparations early. Although this Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill isn't a transcendent divine pill, the difficulty of creating it actually is no less than 1. And in terms of how precious the materials are, it surpasses a transcendent divine pill. This could be called a test on my skill and wealth. As Lin Ming spoke to her, he ruefully smiled. In terms of cultivation level, it was definitely impossible for him to refine a transcendent divine pill. Within the divine realm, a transcendent divine pill was the highest grade of pill possible. A good portion of transcendent divine pills came from the hands of Empire-ians. But, Empire-ians were limited in number to begin with, and most Empire-ians were not skilled alchemists. Although their cultivation was high, they might not be able to match up to half-step Empire-ians and great world kings who specialized in alchemy when it came to their level of skill. Thus, a good part of the transcendent divine pills were also refined by half-step Empire-ians and peak great world kings. In refining a transcendent divine pill, one needed not just sufficient skill in alchemy but also a minimum cultivation base. If one's cultivation was lacking, then they wouldn't be able to continue through the entire alchemy process. Just achieving a certain temperature of fire would be impossible. Lin Ming's current strength couldn't compare to that of a peak great world king, so refining a transcendent divine pill was impossible for him. However, Lin Ming had the support of the divine runic arts and the Asura heavenly Tao. He could refine a top pill at the peak level of an ordinary world king and then use the divine runic arts to forcefully increase its grade to the standard of a transcendent divine pill. This was also Lin Ming's greatest goal in studying the divine runic arts, to use the Asura heavenly Tao to change the rules and find a shortcut. After a dozen more years or so, my alchemy skill should be able to stand on par with the alchemists I have absorbed and even rise to the level of a top ordinary world king. At that time, I should be able to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill. Lin Ming pondered. Currently, his strength could be considered quite good amongst ordinary world kings. In another 6 or 7 years, he should be able to reach the level of Sex Fiend Torch River's alchemy skill. Lin Ming had confidence in himself in this aspect, and moreover when it came to the divine runic arts, it was possible he could surpass Torch River due to his thorough understanding of the Asura heavenly Tao. It was only the materials needed for the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill that were giving Lin Ming a headache. There were all sorts of rare and precious heavenly materials and most of them couldn't be bought, so how would he go about collecting them? Lin Ming jotted down the materials he needed in a list. Of them, the most precious were dragon saliva grass, heaven-devouring snake gallbladder, jade dragon's horn, primal jade quintessence. Many of these materials were connected to god beasts. Speaking of just dragon saliva grass, that was divine grass that was watered and raised with the saliva of a true dragon. There were said to be true dragons and ancient pythons that would wait for a heavenly material to grow, watering it with their saliva the entire time. They would wait for 10,000 years, 100,000 years, until that heavenly material matured, and then they would eat it to increase their own strength. This sort of heavenly material was priceless, and the key problem was that there was almost no market for them. This was because these heavenly materials were often eaten by their guardian beasts after they matured, so how could anyone obtain them? As for a heaven-devouring snake gallbladder, that was the gallbladder from a heaven-devouring 8-path python. Although this type of ancient desolate beast was far from being as strong as a god beast, in the entire Asura road there was only a single place to obtain them, and that was deep within the Great Desolate. And there was no need to mention the dangers within the Great Desolate. That was a land where even Empire-ians had to be cautious. The jade dragon's horn was the bone of a true dragon. Its grade was far beyond the supreme dragon bone that Lin Ming had absorbed in the past, the only exception being that it didn't need to be as large. All of the materials left Lin Ming with a ringing migraine. If he tried to gather them himself, it would be absolutely impossible to collect them all. For instance, that dragon saliva grass was something that could only be discovered through a stroke of fate. If Lin Ming wanted to obtain these materials, his only choice was to buy them. And to buy these things, even if he had a massive amount of wealth, he still might not be able to find a place to purchase them. Not just that, but he wasn't even wealthy to begin with. This left Lin Ming in a dilemma. The road of the 9 stars of the Dao Palace was simply far too expensive. Although it seemed exaggerated that Lin Ming could jump ranks to fight like he could, this sort of monstrous strength was created with the consumption of countless heavenly materials. Every time Lin Ming took a single step forwards in the body transformation technique, he had to consume resources dozens of times that of an essence-gathering system martial artist, or even hundreds of times. Time passed, the years leaving no mark. Without noticing it, another 12 years passed. Lin Ming had stayed in this small and unknown sect for a full 25 years. In these 25 years, Lin Ming seemed to have once again tasted the difficulties and hardships of low-level martial artists as they tried to climb to the top. In these 25 years, Lin Ming's strength didn't rise by too much. But, his state of mind seemed to change, slowly settling and evolving from the constant state of intrigue and slaughter that he experienced for the first 50-some years of his life. The reason he chose the Blue Moon sect to practice his divine runic arts and consolidate his foundation instead of Divine Rune City was because compared to Divine Rune City, this Blue Moon sect was a relatively weak environment. Here, he could lead a simple life, unaffected by the deceits and struggles of the inner court disciples. To him, any conflicts between the Blue Moon sect disciples were like fighting between small ants. In these 25 years of tranquil living, Lin Ming experienced a nirvana of his mind. It was time to leave. This Blue Moon sect could be called the place Lin Ming had stayed at for the longest time in his life. Here, he didn't need to think about anything. He could calmly cultivate, living a mortal life with Xiao Moxian. It could be expected that he would not experience such peaceful and comfortable days in the future. Whether it was the final trial or the great calamity of the divine realm, Lin Ming had to face them all. He could be said to be wandering into a violent storm of blood and terror. And at this time, the granddaughter of the Blue Moon sect sovereign, a young girl named Qian Chao, came to Lin Ming to study alchemy. Qian Chao was 22 years old. In the world of martial artists, she was extremely young. She was born 3 years after Lin Ming came to the Blue Moon sect. Afterwards, when Lin Ming became famous, Qian Chao was still young. At that time she had taken Lin Ming as her idol and now she had grown into a slim and delicate young girl. Qian Chao's talent was very good and her soul force far surpassed other martial artists of her age. Because of this, she was particularly fascinated by alchemy. Every so often she would come to Lin Ming for advice, and unlike the other inner court disciples she was always quiet for fear of disturbing Lin Ming. After all, Lin Ming was usually cold and indifferent to whoever he faced, as if he didn't have any patience at all. Qian Chao had never bothered Lin Ming. Sometimes she would simply watch Lin Ming quietly in the room, taking notes as he practiced his alchemy. At times, Lin Ming would even give her some pointers. Every time, Lin Ming could see a hint of admiration from this young girl's eyes, and even youthful adoration. The current Lin Ming had many more experiences than he had in the past. He naturally knew what this look meant. However, Qian Chao never expressed anything but the utmost respect for Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian. Towards this little girl called Qian Chao, Xiao Moxian would often tease Lin Ming about her. It seemed that she was quite fond of her. Unwittingly and unknowingly, Xiao Moxian's own state of mind experienced a great change. From the past naughty and mischievous young girl she had matured a great deal and become much calmer. As Lin Ming watched Qian Chao quietly recording his alchemy attainments in the outer hall, for some reason he recalled many past memories. For a time many feelings washed over him. It seemed he had developed a strange feeling towards this place where he had lived for the last 25 years. Or, it was better to say that Lin Ming wasn't nostalgic to stay in the Blue Moon sect, but reluctant to part with the 25 years of ease and comfort he had lived. This was a type of living that he had never experienced. Thinking back to the past, it was probably only during his childhood that he lived such a peaceful life. But in any event, Lin Ming was destined to not stay here for much longer. On this day, Lin Ming called over Qian Chao and earnestly taught her the divine runic arts. After 10 to 12 hours of teaching, they finally ended when the sun set. Before leaving, Lin Ming recorded many of his alchemy attainments and passed it to Qian Chao, along with a bracelet. Qian Chao looked at Lin Ming in a daze for some time, her cheeks flushed red. She was surprised that Lin Ming had been so patient with her today. After several breaths of time, she turned around and left with a satisfied expression. As she walked away, her long black hair gently rippled in the wind, dancing in beat with the leaves. Lin Ming lightly sighed. That night, he and Xiao Moxian left this place that they had lived in for 25 years. Their figures quietly vanished in the endless night. No one noticed they vanished, and not even the mountain array formations that protected the Blue Moon sect were able to detect them. When Qian Chao returned to her room, she searched through the bracelet that Lin Ming had given her and was shocked. This bracelet seemed like an ordinary accessory, but the truth was that it was a storage spirit artifact similar to a spatial ring. Left in this bracelet was over 1,000 medium-grade pills as well as a massive amount of divine runic symbols that hadn't yet been used. These medium-grade pills were sufficient for Divine Sea Realm or Divine Transformation Realm martial artists to use. They were even valuable for Divine Lord Realm martial artists. These pills were the ones that Lin Ming had never taken out to sell before. This was because according to common sense, with the level of alchemy he could reach with his cultivation he should never have been able to produce such high-quality medium-grade pills. After Qian Chao was stunned she returned to Lin Ming's residence to look for him. But, Lin Ming had already vanished, without leaving a single trace of himself behind. As she looked through the empty alchemy room and divine runic arts room, she felt hollow for a moment, her heart sinking. Then, she passed all the pills to her grandfather, the sect master of the Blue Moon sect. After receiving these 1,000+ medium-grade pills, the Blue Moon sect master was left dumbfounded, shocked, speechless. Will they come back? Qian Chao suddenly asked, as if she seemed to realize something. The Blue Moon sect master lightly sighed. He ruefully smiled and said, "They are not people of our world, chances are, they will not return." 1 month later, Divine Rune City. A spirit ship came to a slow stop as a young man and woman flew off the deck. After 25 years, Lin Ming had returned to Divine Rune City. But, there was no comparing the him of today to the him of 25 years ago. The refinement of the ravenous wolf heaven pill would all begin here. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1597 Astronomically Expensive Materials. Chapter 1597 Astronomically Expensive Materials. When Lin Ming returned to Divine Rune City, he discovered that the atmosphere was different from before. There were over 10 times the guards stationed at the city gates. Originally, there were several guards at the gates of Divine Rune City, and their cultivation was at the Divine Lord realm. But now, there was a small army of soldiers, and the leader of this group was a Holy Lord. Every person that entered the city was subjected to a strict interrogation. That Holy Lord captain always held a crystal ball in his hands with strange law lines that shimmered within it. These law lines were clearly due to the divine runic arts. Lin Ming could see from a glance that this crystal ball was used to determine whether or not a martial artist that was trying to enter the city had disguised their cultivation. Strange. Lin Ming rubbed his chin. Why was Divine Rune City on such high alert all of a sudden? Is there some influence that wants to attack Divine Rune City? Xiao Moxian asked. Lin Ming shook his head. It shouldn't be. Divine Rune City is a neutral place to begin with, and it is a massive influence with a tremendous number of Divine Runic Masters. There shouldn't be anyone that would move against Divine Rune City, especially since so many other organizations depend on them. Lin Ming pressed down the suspicions in his mind. He walked over to the city gates with Xiao Moxian, whereupon the both of them were immediately stopped. City entrance token. A martial artist icily said as he blocked Lin Ming's path. Lin Ming looked at the war armor that these guards were wearing. Some of them wore the standard service armor of Divine Rune City and others didn't. As if they were formed from two different groups. Lin Ming said, I am a Divine Runic Master from the Divine Runic Masters Guild. This is my badge. Lin Ming took out his 3rd grade Divine Runic Master badge. After the guard inspected it, he returned it to Lin Ming and allowed him and Xiao Moxian to pass. After entering Divine Rune City, it became apparent that the inside clearly hadn't changed much. The streets were still busy and bustling as usual. Lin Ming walked all the way to the Divine Runic Masters Guild, flashing his Divine Runic Master badge and entering. As he passed through the trading area, he saw many Divine Runic Masters and alchemists trading within. He also immediately saw Old Xiu. At this time Old Xiu was comfortably reclining back in a rocking chair. A pile of random items was placed in front of him and he seemed to have fallen asleep. After 25 years, Old Xiu hadn't changed at all. As Lin Ming and Xiao Moxian walked past, Old Xiu's eyes suddenly shot open. Hey boy, so it was you. Old Xiu's eyes shined as he saw Lin Ming as if he had seen a treasure. He looked at Lin Ming for a long time, looking him up and down until even Lin Ming began feeling uncomfortable. Lin Ming coughed, Elder Xiu, it's been a while. Xiao Moxian also sweetly called out, Elder Xiu, it's nice to see you. Old Xiu lit up with a smile as he heard Xiao Moxian greet him. He had an extremely good impression of this likable young girl. But as he turned back to Lin Ming, his face darkened. It's been over 20 years. Do you even remember that you are a Divine Runic Master of the Divine Runic Masters Guild? Brat, I think you must have forgotten everything as you went adventuring outside. Even so, it seems you managed to make a breakthrough in your cultivation. I remember that when you left you were only at the early Divine Lord realm. Lin Ming rolled his eyes. It seemed this Old Xiu really spoke without caring for what he said. It's a lucky breakthrough. I must say, Old Xiu, now that I've returned to Divine Rune City I saw a great number of guards standing outside. Just what is going on? Heh, it's a war. Old Xiu grinned, looking as if he didn't care much. It seemed he was already accustomed to these types of situations. Although I said it's a war, the truth is that it's not related to us. It's a Spiritas Empire-ian influence of the Inner Asura Road, the Extreme Star Holy Lands, fighting with another Saint Empire-ian influence, the Heaven Strife Holy Lands. As for the reason they decided to suddenly go to war, it's probably because they are competing for something. Our Divine Runic Masters Guild is one of the groups supporting the Extreme Star Holy Lands. Because they are at war they buy up a massive amount of pills and divine runic symbols that are constantly transported to the war front. As for the guards at the city entrance, they were sent here by the Extreme Star Holy Lands. They're afraid that there will be some Saint spy infiltrating into our city to stir up chaos. During this period of war, all Saint martial artists, regardless of whether or not they are connected to the Heaven Strife Holy Lands, are forbidden from entering the city. In these last 100 million years, the Divine Runic Masters Guild would occasionally cooperate with some great influences and provide them with a massive number of pills and divine runic symbols. Of course, these great influences would pay them back with rich rewards, including origin energy runes, rare and precious materials, inheritance jade slips, and so forth. This was a significant source of wealth for the Divine Runic Masters Guild. Compared to the income of the shops in Divine Rune City, the income from participating in these wars was often far more valuable. So it's like that. Lin Ming thoughtfully said. When human martial artists studied the divine runic arts, they were only inferior to the spiritas. As for the saints, they could be called simple-minded with extremely brawny bodies. Their soul force was pitifully weak and they weren't suited for auxiliary skills like the divine runic arts or alchemy. Moreover, the saints didn't have a good relationship with the spiritas to begin with. Indeed, in all these years, there weren't many saint martial artists that came to Divine Rune City. The crystal balls placed at the gates of the city were to prevent any saint martial artists from sneaking their way in. Lin Ming was secretly startled. In these 100 million years it was unknown how many times the Divine Runic Masters Guild had cooperated with other influences like this. The wealth they had accumulated after all this time could be imagined. I must say, boy, why did you return so suddenly? Is there something going on? Old Xiu eyed Lin Ming suspiciously. He felt that this fishy boy probably needed something. After being seen through by Old Xiu, Lin Ming awkwardly rubbed his chin. He said, there really is something I need. The reason I returned to Divine Rune City is because I need to buy some materials to refine a pill. Lin Ming directly stated a goal. Huh. So you've even practiced alchemy. Old Xiu looked at Lin Ming in surprise. With his current understanding of Lin Ming, if Lin Ming dared to say he wanted to refine a pill, then his skill in alchemy was likely considerably high. You brat, you know to return when you want to make use of us, but are you aware you have 0 contribution points? In the Divine Runic Masters Guild, the contributions that a Divine Runic Master made to the guild would be converted into points. Since Lin Ming had been gone for 25 years, he naturally didn't have any contribution points. Lin Ming awkwardly coughed. He smiled and said, there were some matters I had to attend to, so I've been a bit delayed. I should be staying at the Divine Runic Masters Guild for a period of time, and there really are some rare and precious materials I need to buy. I just don't know where they are sold. As Lin Ming spoke, Old Xiu rolled his eyes and sent Lin Ming a look of disdain. He said, what are you smiling so sadly about? My Divine Runic Masters Guild has the best and most complete material storehouse in the entire world. There are no materials you cannot buy, I'm only afraid that you can't afford them. Old Xiu said with full confidence, a great deal of pride glowing on his face. Then I'd like to request for you to look over this list and see if I can obtain these materials here. Lin Ming smiled and took out a list from his spatial ring. This list had all the materials needed to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill. There were a total of 32 different kinds of materials. Old Xiu took the list with a great show of graciousness. Then, he looked over the list. He was immediately left dumbfounded. The first several materials on the list were precious, but as long as one had enough money they could be bought. However, the latter materials were horrifying. There were several materials that even Old Xiu had never seen before, he had only heard of them. Dragon Saliva Grass, Heaven Devouring Snake Ball Bladder, Jade Dragon's Horn, Primal Jade Quintessence. Old Xiu was left stunned. Not even the Divine Runic Masters Guild had all of these materials. Although the Divine Runic Masters Guild's storehouse was rich and abundant, since there were materials that came in, there were materials that went out. If these materials couldn't be converted into pills and divine runic symbols, then they were useless. Thus, after many rare and precious materials entered the storehouse, they would soon be traded away to others. As for the extremely rare and precious materials that were in high demand and couldn't be bought normally, they didn't stay in the storehouse for too long. These materials that Lin Ming had listed, if placed within the Divine Runic Masters Guild storehouse, would require the highest level of authority to use. That was, the authority of a 7th grade Divine Runic Master. Moreover, the price was bound to be astronomically high, to the point where one would strain their neck. Are you messing around with me? Old Xiu slapped the list on the table, his beard and eyebrows flying up in a rage. He felt that Lin Ming was teasing him. Just how could a young junior use these materials? In his opinion, even if Lin Ming obtained these materials, it would be impossible for him to use them in alchemy. It would be a complete waste. Why would we be messing with you? If we buy them, we are definitely using them. Xiao Moxian backed up Lin Ming. Old Xiu looked at Xiao Moxian, half believing, half disbelieving. He turned back to Lin Ming. Are these materials things your master wishes to use? Old Xiu immediately thought. Lin Ming pushed this train of thought along. He laughed, saying, that's about right. Do you think the Divine Runic Masters Guild has these materials? Old Xiu gave Lin Ming a side eye and leisurely said, the more general rare and precious materials are indeed here, but I'm afraid that the Divine Runic Masters Guild only has 2 or 3 of the most precious materials on this list. Moreover, they are exorbitantly expensive. Not only do you need a massive amount of origin energy runes, but more importantly you need a certain degree of authority as well as contribution points. I estimate that just one of those materials will require 700 to 800 million points. If you stay in the Divine Runic Masters Guild in the future, you will receive a monthly salary of contribution points. As a 3rd grade Divine Runic Master, I think every 18 million years or so you will be able to barely afford a few leaves of Dragon Saliva Grass. Old Xiu mockingly said. As a 3rd grade Divine Runic Master, Lin Ming's yearly salary would be around 20 points. In 10 million years he would receive 200 million points, just barely enough to buy a single material. Of course, if Lin Ming rose to a higher level of Divine Runic Master in the future, then his salary would also increase. Even then, it wouldn't be by too much. Lin Ming wryly smiled. Old Xiu, I'm glad you're happy teasing me. Old Xiu spread his hands in goodwill. I'm just seeking the truth. Even I can't afford the things you want. But, if your master is willing to join the Divine Runic Masters Guild, then he might be able to obtain what is needed in a short period of time. Seeing Old Xiu make circles to ask about his master, Lin Ming said, my master will not come to the Divine Runic Masters Guild. Only I can buy these materials. Ha. Then do as you want. Old Xiu lazily said, his expression saying he didn't care about Lin Ming's business. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. At novel being at. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1598 Mission Division. Chapter 1598 Mission Division. Lin Ming, what do you plan on doing? 700 to 800 million points to buy a single one of the materials you need. How could we afford that? Although Xiao Moxion's lips twitched as she saw Old Xiu's disdainful attitude, she couldn't help but acknowledge that what he said was the truth. There was simply an astronomical number of contribution points needed to buy these materials. Not to mention that even if they had the contribution points, they also needed 9 Sun Jades. At novel being at. And their 9 Sun Jades weren't enough. Let's go take a look. Maybe there's some way we can earn some. Lin Ming thought for a moment. He knew that there were several ways in the Divine Runic Masters Guild to earn points. The first way was a monthly salary. However, as a 3rd grade Divine Runic Master, his monthly salary was negligible. It was simply far too little. The second way was to trade, but Lin Ming couldn't think of anything he could take out to sell for a large number of contribution points. He had some of the pills and divine runic symbols he drew up at the Blue Moon sect, and some of them were even decent in quality, but none of these things would be able to sell at a good enough price. The people of the Divine Runic Masters Guild simply had too high a standard. The third way was missions. The Divine Runic Masters Guild often issued out missions. After completing them, one would receive contribution points as a reward. The fourth way was to contribute one's research results and specialized techniques to the Divine Runic Masters Guild. One would earn a great deal of rewards from this. Lin Ming had several special techniques that others didn't know of that he had obtained from the memories of the 3 Divine Runic Masters he killed. But, these techniques weren't particularly heaven-defying. Even if he contributed them, it was nothing but a drop in the ocean compared to the hundreds of millions of points he needed. If Lin Ming had a true heaven-defying technique, that would be the understandings of the Asura Heavenly Tao laws described in the Asura Sutra 1st volume. But, Lin Ming hadn't even fully cultivated the Asura Sutra, so it was impossible for him to copy down the intricate secrets within, and even if he could, he wouldn't reveal the tiniest secret related to the Asura Sutra. This type of inheritance was just far too tempting to others. Removing the first, second, and fourth way of earning points, Lin Ming could only choose the third way. That was to undergo missions and earn contribution points. Elder Xiu, I plan to take on missions to earn points. Take on missions. Elder Xiu looked up at Lin Ming in surprise, a strange light glowing in his eyes. Don't tell me you plan on completing missions to earn enough points to buy those materials. Lin Ming nodded. I'll give it a try. There isn't another way I can think of. Good heavens, boy. Elder Xiu looked at Lin Ming like a lunatic. Have you not woken up yet? Do you know how many points you will receive per mission at your level? I don't know what you've been messing around with during these last 20-some years, but I could approximately guess it. A monstrous abnormality like you can surprise me, but no matter just how amazing your achievements have been in these 20-some years, you shouldn't think of relying on that alone to earn enough points through missions. If you want to buy all the materials you want, I estimate you will need at least 3 billion points. Even if I wanted to earn 3 billion points, I would have to work myself to the bone, and I'd still have no idea how long it would be until I would have earned them all. Lin Ming had already thought of everything that Elder Xiu spoke of. Although he had a shortcut to studying the Divine Runic Arts and Alchemy, in terms of grade, Lin Ming was still a 5th grade Divine Runic Master. After all, the 3 Divine Runic Masters Lin Ming killed had been at most at the 6th grade, and wanting to surpass them would take more time. To practice to the point of being a 5th grade Divine Runic Master in a mere 25 years was far too exaggerated. There wouldn't be anyone who believed this. What 5th grade Divine Runic Master hadn't spent thousands of years or tens of thousands of years to get where they were? And even a 5th grade Divine Runic Master wouldn't be able to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill. Just the materials alone gave one a headache. Basically speaking, those that could afford the several rare materials he needed were Empire-ian level characters. Even a great world king would feel destitute if they tried to purchase these materials. However, everything depended on the individual, and everything was possible with enough effort. Lin Ming had spent an unimaginable price to first establish the 9 stars of the Dao Palace, and then spent a considerable effort to obtain the 9 stars of the Dao Palace section of the Celestial Tyrant Manual, finally finding a light on the road. It was impossible for him to give up now. Elder Xiu, where is the Special Mission Division? Lin Ming asked. He wasn't too familiar with the Divine Runic Masters Guild. After old Xiu listened to this, he rolled his eyes yet again. You brat, you don't even know where the mission division is. It's clear you haven't come to the Divine Runic Masters Guild even a handful of times. Lin Ming hollowly laughed at Elder Xiu's grumbling, not speaking back. Whatever, I just think you're crazy, so just forget about it. I'll lead you over there so you can see just what the level of rewards is for the missions and finally decide to give up. Old Xiu had sat at his stall all day and hadn't sold much at all, so he decided to close shop instead. At his age, it was no longer possible to increase his cultivation and he liked to idle his time away. Setting up a stall was just a casual lifestyle that old Xiu liked to live. He loved the sense of achievement of selling high and buying low, and also finding good treasures. The truth was that he didn't need the stall for any income. This was what people meant by fishing for the fishing and not for the fish. Old Xiu brought Lin Ming through some ancient-looking corridors. Finally, he arrived in another hall of the Divine Runic Masters Guild. This hall resembled a small city square. The area was considerably broad, covering a wide area. There were a few people here, some young and some old, and everyone wore the robes of a Divine Runic Master or Alchemist. It seemed they were all people with status. At the center of the hall was a giant array disc. Above this array disc were floating screens of scrolling text. This was an illusory magic array. Its role was to project text information, and all of these scrolling texts represented missions. In addition, on the side of the hall there were stacks of scrolls. These scrolls were also missions, but the difficulty was a bit lower than the missions projected on the illusory magic array. This is where you can pick up missions. Most of the missions they hand out can be found here. The minor missions give as little as several hundred points, and the highest ones are worth a dozen or 2 million points. But those missions that give 10 to 20 million points require you to be at least a peak 6th grade Divine Runic Master. They are extremely difficult and not even I can complete them. Old Xiu slowly said as he played with a walnut in his hands. This walnut was a magic tool crafted from wood. Look, I'm not trying to bring you down here, but if you really want to rely on completing missions to buy those precious materials you want, then you will need several 100,000 years unless you can rise to an even higher level of Divine Runic Master. Lin Ming looked through the mission contents. Indeed, as old Xiu said, those that rewarded several million points required one to be a great World King, Divine Runic Master or Alchemist to be completed. With Lin Ming's current strength it was impossible. Although old Xiu had underestimated Lin Ming's skill level in the Divine Runic Arts, his conclusion wasn't wrong in the end. Lin Ming silently calculated. As a 5th grade Divine Runic Master, the highest reward missions he could complete only offered several 100,000 points. Moreover, anything that gave several 100,000 points wasn't an easy mission at all. These missions took more than 4 or 5 days, and some even took as long as a month. If he was obtaining 20,000 to 30,000 points in 1 month, he would need to work for over 1,000 years to gather 3 billion points. And this was in a situation where one took missions non-stop. In reality, no one would do this. A Divine Runic Master had to practice, study, go into seclusion, and so forth. It was also impossible for this war to continue for 1,000 years. Lin Ming gained an even deeper understanding of how precious the materials were that he needed to buy. It was simply impossible for a 5th grade Divine Runic Master to obtain them. The only possibility would be a peak 6th grade Divine Runic Master expending a massive amount of time and effort. Xiao Moxian also knew what level Lin Ming's skills were at. She worriedly said, Lin Ming, what can we do? We'll have to participate in the final trial in another 25 years. There isn't enough time for you to earn the points. I don't know. Let's continue looking first. Lin Ming didn't have any plan currently. Old Xiu spread his hands. Well, now you've seen it. If you want to complete missions to earn enough points for those materials, then you're simply living a dream. But if you don't want to give up, you can go to the mission posting office to see if there's some mission that's good for you. Old Xiu pointed at the end of the hall. Over there was an antique long counter, and standing behind this counter were 4 or 5 people. Out of them, a young woman with an explosive figure was the most eye-catching. This woman wore a flame-colored dress, and this dress drew tight to her skin, accentuating her enthralling curves and buxom, perfectly enchanting figure. The front of the dress had deep, plunging neckline, thrusting down and exposing a snow-white valley even as it gave a sneak peek of her proud and full breasts. The tight dress had slits that ran up to the base of her thighs, and every movement she took drew the eyes to her waist, inviting one to daydream over the hidden wonders. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1599 4th Grade Mission. Chapter 1599 4th Grade Mission. Seeing the woman in the red dress, Lin Ming was stunned. In the world of martial artists, every place had their own clothing customs. In the human race within the divine realm, most clothing types tended towards being conservative. But in the inner Asura Road, many places had women that wore bold and provocative clothing. And with this woman in front of him dressed the way she was, Lin Ming couldn't help but acknowledge that she had a special flavor to her. She easily aroused a man's desire to conquer and ravish. This woman is quite extraordinary, Lin Ming said, his eyes remaining glued to the woman's body. Old Xiu cheekily grinned. He said to Lin Ming, isn't she a top-grade woman? She is from the Extreme Star Holy Lands and her name is Suya. Don't look down on her, she is not simple at all. Old Xiu traced his beard, meaning thick in his voice. He knew that someone with an explosive figure like Suya who dressed in such enchanting clothing exerted a considerably strong attraction towards young men. Her body was like a ripe peach, making everyone want to take a bit of her. Seeing Old Xiu's expression, Xiao Moxian coughed in displeasure. She twisted Lin Ming's arm with her hand. Women could be strange sometimes. Towards Na, Vi and young competitors, they wouldn't develop any jealousy. For instance, when Lin Ming was in the Blue Moon sect, Xiao Moxian could see that the sect master's granddaughter Qian Chao had developed a crush on Lin Ming and she was only a third of his age. As long as Lin Ming wanted to, he could have easily taken her in as a concubine. Even so, Xiao Moxian had still been very kind to Qian Chao, even treating her like she were her own little sister. But towards this alluring and sexual Suya, Xiao Moxian couldn't help but think that she was displeasing to the eyes. Old Xiu coughed upon seeing Xiao Moxian's disgruntlement. He straightened himself out and seriously said, this Suya is our Divine Runic Masters Guild's contact with the Extreme Star Holy Lands. If you want to take on a mission, it's best if you go through her, because since the Extreme Star Holy Lands are at war, there are many missions with a high point reward. I see. Hearing Old Xiu's response, Lin Ming found it all amusing. He walked over to Suya. As he approached, he could see that there were 6 Divine Runic Masters there to take on missions. Without exception, all of these Divine Runic Masters were men. There were young men as well as middle-aged men. These 6 Divine Runic Masters were speaking with the red-dressed women, and from their eyes Lin Ming could see a faint hint of vivid heat. Normally, young elite Divine Runic Masters had extremely high standards and were never for want of women. There were innumerable women that were willing to throw themselves in the chests of these Divine Runic Masters. But in front of Suya, they seemed to have lost all the lofty manners of a Divine Runic Master and fell down in worship at the base of her deep red dress. This also implied to Lin Ming that this Suya was not just a beautiful vase, but also someone with considerable strength and methods. Lin Ming discovered that these 6 Divine Runic Masters were treated differently by Suya. Towards the 4 younger Divine Runic Masters, Suya was polite and curt in her answers, not really paying much attention to them. It was only to those 2 middle-aged Divine Runic Masters that Suya spoke at length and smiled warmly. And those 2 middle-aged Divine Runic Masters were both peak 5th grade Divine Runic Masters, not too far away from becoming 6th grade Divine Runic Masters. This woman is quite arrogant. Those young Divine Runic Masters don't even enter her eyes, but the range of missions that a young Divine Runic Master can complete is indeed limited. Lin Ming mused to himself. Xiao Moxian scoffed. Did this Extreme Star Holy Land specifically send such a sexually charged young woman here to attract all those deviants at the Divine Runic Masters Guild to complete missions for her? Lin Ming was startled for a moment before he laughed out loud. Indeed, this was a possibility. Because of Suya, this mission division area might be busier than usual. Lin Ming pushed into the group of 6 Divine Runic Masters, causing the 4 young ones to look at him with annoyance in their eyes. Lin Ming glanced over their Divine Runic badges. The 4 youths were 2nd or 3rd grade Divine Runic Masters. Lin Ming's badge also indicated he was a 3rd grade Divine Runic Master, so their statuses were similar. Stop being so pushy. Someone unhappily said, not recognizing Lin Ming. Lin Ming had only briefly appeared when he joined in on the Divine Runic Masters examination 25 years ago. Afterwards he left the Divine Runic Masters Guild. Besides Old Xiu, Old Su, and the several examination officials present, no one would recognize him. As that young Divine Runic Master was halfway done speaking, he caught a glance at Old Xiu behind Lin Ming. He quickly hid away all anger and instead put on a bright smile, saying, "Greetings, Elder Xiu." The 2 middle-aged men also politely greeted Old Xiu. "Elder Xiu, it seems you also came for missions." Although the 2 middle-aged men were peak 5th grade Divine Runic Masters, there was a great difference between them and the 6th grade Divine Runic Master Old Xiu. This was essentially the difference between a peak Holy Lord and a World King. It was at this step that countless martial artists were stranded forever, never able to make a breakthrough. It had to be known that even an ordinary World King had the talent of an Empyrean descendant. "I'm just taking a look." Old Xiu laughed, accepting the greetings of these juniors. Behind the counter, Suya brightened as she saw Old Xiu, like a peony opening in the shining spring sun. She sweetly said, "Elder Xiu, I've been here for so many days and there are many missions that I can't seem to get completed. Perhaps you could help me out a little." At novel bean at. Suya's voice was crisp and tender to the bone. If a girl heard it, it might seem a bit fake. But to a man, this was a lethal tone. Even Old Xiu's beard shook as he heard this, it seemed he enjoyed the attention. "You old pervert." Xiao Moxian harshly denounced. Lin Ming chuckled at her response. "I'm flattered, flattered. I'll take a few missions since I'm here, but the main reason I came to the mission division is to introduce this boy to you." As Old Xiu spoke, he pointed towards Lin Ming. "He entered the Divine Runic Masters Guild 20-some years ago. He's in a bit of a need for contribution points, so he'll probably need to do a number of missions for you." As Old Xiu introduced Lin Ming, Suya took a glance at his Divine Runic Master badge. As a mere 3rd grade Divine Runic Master, she didn't place him in her eyes. She didn't really want to bother speaking to such a young divine runic master, but since old Xu introduced him she couldn't ignore him. Raindrop, arrange a mission for him. Suya casually said. Beside her a well-behaved little girl took out a pile of mission scrolls and gave them to Lin Ming to look at. Lin Ming looked over these mission scrolls. They were third-grade missions and below. The rewards were several hundred points or even several dozen points. It was really small to the point of being pitiful. Do you have higher grade missions? Lin Ming asked. Suya was a bit taken aback. Lin Ming was a third-grade divine runic master, but he wanted to take on even higher grades of missions. Old Xu wasn't surprised at all. A monstrous freak like Lin Ming simply couldn't be judged by common sense. He laughed, saying, since this boy wants to see them, take out some higher grade missions for him. Perhaps he has the ability to complete them. Although Suya thought otherwise, since it was old Xu requesting this, she had no choice but to act accordingly. Raindrop, bring out some 4th and 5th grade missions. Raindrop picked out a number of mission scrolls, all of them at the 4th and 5th grade. Lin Ming earnestly looked through every mission. He carefully analyzed them all, calculating which one had the potential for the most points. What an idiot. Behind Lin Ming, those several young divine runic masters mocked him without holding back. Of course, because old Xu was present they could only speak to each other with sound transmission. This fellow's courting tactics are, well, he's got more guts than we do. We're only at the level of trying to get closer to Miss Suya, but this idiot is trying to stir up a big fuss in front of her. We should study his techniques a little later. I bet you he will take out several mission scrolls to bring back. It's not like he will lose anything if he can't complete them. As the several young divine runic masters spoke, Lin Ming indeed took out several mission scrolls. These mission scrolls were all 4th grade, but they were also at the highest level of 4th grade missions. Compared to the rewards from 5th grade missions, the difference wasn't that great. Lin Ming meticulously looked through these mission scrolls. The more difficult a mission was, the more time it took, the higher the rewards would be. As a 5th grade divine runic master, Lin Ming had the ability to complete 5th grade missions. But, he also had to calculate the time and energy he would need to invest into these 5th grade missions, and after doing so he discovered that the reward to effort ratio wasn't much higher. As for these peak 4th grade missions, Lin Ming could rely on his skill and understanding of the Asura Heavenly Tao to rapidly complete them. Lin Ming took out a total of 5 4th grade mission scrolls and lined them up on the countertop. Looking at the difficulty of these 5 mission scrolls, the several young divine runic masters present were left speechless. This boy, his skin is too thick. Putting on an act all depended on how thick one's skin was. If one's skin wasn't thick enough there was no way they could fake things to such a degree. If they were in Lin Ming's position there was no way they could pretend to peruse through such difficult missions. These missions, all of them could only be completed by someone that was at least a peak 4th grade divine runic master. He's forcing this too much. Only an idiot would think he could complete them, and Miss Suya isn't stupid, so how could she believe him? That's right, his acting is going to have the opposite effect now. As the several young divine runic masters spoke, they indeed saw Suya frown. If it weren't for the fact that Lin Ming was brought here by Elder Xu, she would have already sent him tumbling out of the mission division. She felt nothing but disgust for young men that liked to play such tricks. These missions, do you plan on completing them by yourself? Suya heatedly asked Lin Ming. Because the reward points given by the Divine Runic Masters Guild were directly placed into the Divine Runic Masters badge, normally Divine Runic Masters would come here in person to receive missions, they wouldn't send representatives. Lin Ming didn't directly answer. Instead, he said, if I'm taking a mission I naturally have some confidence I can complete it. Ha ha. Suya faintly sneered. She felt that she had to put some restrictions on people who would appear at her counter in the future, lest some brain-addled idiots like this Lin Ming appear in front of her again. Raindrop, register these missions to him. Suya coldly said. She would do things properly for old Xu Sahe, but the truth was that she had already considered Lin Ming an idiot who was up to no good and had placed him on her personal blacklist. Tip, you can use left, right, and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters.
Not ready yet. More time. No way. I can't. I need fury. Your flesh is weak.
Martial World. Chapter 1603 billion points. Chapter 1603 billion points.
No way.
Seeing Raindrop record his name on a mission Jade slip, Lin Ming seemed to remember something. He asked Suya, the missions you issue, are materials subsidized? The missions that the Extreme Star Holy Lands gave out were mostly to have Divine Runic Masters draw up Divine Runic symbols or for alchemists to refine pills. Upon completion of these missions, the Extreme Star Holy Lands would give the Divine Runic Masters Guild the rewards, and then the Divine Runic Masters Guild would convert this reward to an appropriate portion of points and pay the Divine Runic Master. But besides rewarding points, the Extreme Star Holy Lands also had to subsidize materials with money. The Extreme Star Holy Lands would only subsidize the bare minimum of required materials to complete the mission. If a Divine Runic Master or Alchemist failed in the creation process, then they could only eat the losses themselves. You also want materials. Suya almost laughed out loud from anger. Although she nearly wanted to tell Lin Ming off, she had an amazing level of self-restraint. She said, if you can complete the mission, then I will refund the cost of the materials to you. But for now I'll have to say sorry, you're going to need to put forth the advance money for the materials yourself. Oh. I see. Lin Ming still had many 9 Sun Jades left, so buying the materials wasn't a problem. As for Suya's reaction, he didn't care about it at all. He had come here to complete missions and earn points in order to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven pill, not to chase after women. Lin Ming picked up the 5 mission scrolls and asked, is there a deadline for these missions? Whenever you want. Suya coldly said. These missions usually had a deadline of 3 months, and the sooner they were completed, the higher the rewards were. On the battlefield, time was life. However, Suya didn't have much hope in Lin Ming, so she replied thoughtlessly. I understand. Lin Ming took the scrolls and walked away. Old Xiu traced his chin. He said, boy, can you really complete a peak 4th grade Divine Runic symbol? Even Old Xiu found this hard to accept. A Divine Runic Master needed time to study and improve. No matter how talented one was, it was impossible to learn all the required skills overnight. When Lin Ming left the Divine Runic Masters Guild, he had only been a 3rd grade Divine Runic Master. Now, not too long time had passed, so how could he possibly be a peak 4th grade Divine Runic Master? I'm bringing them back to give them a try. There should be a chance I succeed. Lin Ming ambiguously replied, not confirming anything. Old Xiu said, but, even if you complete these missions, the contribution points you will receive are nothing but a drop in the bucket when compared to 3 billion points. If you continue like this, you will need 2 to 3,000 years to purchase the materials you want. And that is also in a situation where you succeed every time and don't have to pay for the materials. In truth, even a peak 5th grade Divine Runic Master wouldn't say that they would succeed every time, and if you have to pay for the materials of the failures yourself, then your profits will be extremely small. Of the missions Lin Ming obtained, the highest one had an 80,000 point reward and the rest were 50,000 to 60,000. Even if he completed all of them, that would only be around 300,000 points. That was nothing but a fraction of 3 billion. Moreover, these missions weren't easy at all. The mission scrolls often required 20 Divine Runic symbols to be drawn up. For an ordinary Divine Runic Master, this would take several months to complete. At this rate, earning 3 billion points in 2 to 3,000 years would be considered extremely fast. These materials are ridiculously expensive. Lin Ming helplessly muttered. Of all the pill materials he needed, none of them were inferior to the supreme dragon bone that he found in the God Beast Mystic Realm, and that was something that even great world kings would fight for. After leaving the mission hall, Lin Ming read through the 5 mission scrolls once more. The first mission scroll was to refine 30 white yang pills as well as mark them with 4th grade Divine Runic symbols. If the refining process went smoothly, then he could produce 30 white yang pills in 3 furnace batches. The second mission scroll was to draw up 20 Thunder God symbols. The third mission scroll was to draw up 20 Havoc Flame symbols. The fourth mission scroll was to draw up 20,000 God Earth Shield symbols. The fifth mission scroll was to draw up 20 Bone Battle Armor symbols. All of these Divine Runic symbols were used to kill an enemy or protect oneself. When a martial artist was fighting an enemy, they would often find themselves in a situation where they had exhausted their true essence or were unable to react fast enough. At this time, throwing out an offensive or defensive Divine Runic symbol could change the tide of battle. There were even some precious Divine Runic symbols that could allow one to jump ranks to fight. For instance, in the Marble Blue Nation, Empress Nei had used a life-seizing talisman when Lin Ming attacked her. At that time he had only been a half-step world king. But, the life-seizing talisman she had was enough to cause severe wounds to an ordinary world king. If Lin Ming wasn't skilled in the Asura Heavenly Dao and broke through that life-seizing talisman with a single spear strike, then he would have been severely wounded, let alone be able to wound Nei. The Havoc Flame symbols and Thunder God symbols were both offensive symbols. As for the 1000 God Earth symbols and the Bone Battle Armor symbols, they were defensive symbols. Imagine. In a battle when both sides were desperately fighting to the limit and were in their final life or death struggle, at this time, one party would pull out a defensive Divine Runic symbol to block the other party's attack. Then, the result of the battle could be imagined. When two armies battled, it was a competition of the martial artist's strength as well as a competition of their equipment. If one side was fully armed, using top spirit artifacts, all sorts of divine runic symbols, and all sorts of pills without consideration for money, while the other side used ordinary weapons, then there was no need to imagine what the result of that battle would be like. Because of this reason, the Extreme Star Holy Lands had paid an exorbitant price to cooperate with the Divine Runic Masters Guild. 3 billion points. Lin Ming stroked the thick mission scroll, lost in thought. At novel being at. In order to gain 3 billion points, it was impossible to do this by completing these steps in an ordinary manner. Lin Ming pondered for a long time. Finally, from the 5th grade mission scrolls he picked up the Havoc Flame symbol. He planned to start with these Havoc Flame symbols first. For the past 25 years, Lin Ming had spent the majority of his time and energy on drawing up medicinal runic symbols. This was because medicinal runic symbols were extremely important to him. Even so, the principles between the various kinds of divine runic symbols were the same to begin with. With Lin Ming's current strength, drawing up a Havoc Flame symbol wouldn't be difficult at all. And this Havoc Flame symbol was a popular offensive divine runic symbol to begin with. So many divine runic masters knew how to draw it up, including the 3 that Lin Ming had killed. In Lin Ming's mind, the complete drawing plan of the Havoc Flame symbol appeared, along with Sex Fiend Torch River's version that had slight alterations. If he followed along this method, then the Havoc Flame symbol he drew up would be slightly stronger. After helping Xiao Moxian settle somewhere else and purchasing enough materials, Lin Ming went alone to the rear court of the Divine Runic Masters Guild. Here there was a special service where they rented out divine runic arts rooms. I want to rent a divine runic symbol drawing room, Lin Ming said to the young lady responsible for receiving guests. When Lin Ming was in the Blue Moon sect, he had transformed 2 rooms in his residence to a simple alchemy room and divine runic arts room. Of course, if they were compared to a specialized divine runic arts room, the difference was considerable. A high-grade divine runic arts room had an astronomical construction cost. They were often rented according to a daily basis and the costs were sky-high. Hello. A young receptionist faintly smiled at Lin Ming, bowing. The divine runic symbol drawing rooms are between grade 1 and 7 and each has a different price. Which one would you like to rent? The highest grade possible. Lin Ming planned to undertake a great battle in this divine runic arts room. He naturally couldn't fall behind when it came to quality of the facilities. Of course. The young receptionist's dulcet voice was sweet. She called out a price list for Lin Ming. As Lin Ming looked over this list, he was left speechless. A 6th grade and 7th grade divine runic arts room needed not just a massive amount of origin energy runes but, more importantly, contribution points. To rent a 6th grade divine runic arts room for a month required 1000 contribution points. A 7th grade divine runic arts room was even more exaggerated, a single month required 10,000 contribution points. Lin Ming's current contribution points were 0. He could only rent a 5th grade divine runic arts room that required no contribution points. After paying in violet sun crystals, Lin Ming was brought by the receptionist to a divine runic arts room. Within this room there were different models of divine runic pens, a luxurious divine runic table, as well as various tools needed to process materials. In addition, the divine runic arts room itself was supported by a giant array formation. The function of this array formation was to make it easier for one to gather their soul force and could increase the success rate of a divine runic symbol drawing plan by at least 30%. I'll rent this place for half a year, Lin Ming said. The young receptionist looked at Lin Ming with surprise. According to Lin Ming's badge, he was a 3rd grade divine runic master, yet he wanted to rent a 5th grade divine runic arts room for half a year. In her opinion, this was a considerable waste. But she had seen many rich low-level divine runic masters in her time, so she wasn't alarmed. Great. The young receptionist bowed and withdrew. In the entire room, there was only Lin Ming left. At this time, Xiao Moxian wasn't living together with Lin Ming. Lin Ming planned to completely invest his concentration in drawing the divine runic symbols. He wanted to gather the materials required for the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill in 3 years and then use another 3 years to refine the Ravenous Wolf Heaven Pill and break through the 2nd Dao Palace of the 9 stars of the Dao Palace. To earn 3 billion points in 3 years, not even a 7th grade divine runic master would brag to such a degree. If anyone else were to learn that Lin Ming had this plan, they would think he was insane. But Lin Ming had to do this. He didn't have much time to slowly sharpen himself. The most he could stay in the Asura Road for was another 20-some years. In these 20-some years he had to refine pills, open the 2nd Dao Palace, consolidate his foundation, and participate in the final trial. Time was of the essence. He felt the smooth divine runic table. Then, as Lin Ming took a deep breath, his eyes flashed with a brilliant light. From the time he first came into contact with the inscription technique when he was 15 years old, nearly 70 years had passed. Lin Ming had a special affection towards the divine runic arts because of his past. Now that he had to rely on the divine runic arts to earn these astronomically expensive materials, he was faintly excited. The pattern for the Havoc Flame symbol appeared in his mind. Lin Ming took out 7 or 8 materials and threw them onto an array formation on the divine runic table. This array formation was able to automatically process materials for Lin Ming. Like this, processing materials and the degree of heat could be controlled by adjusting an array formation. This was also the greatest supportive function of a divine runic arts room. One would be able to save a massive amount of soul force for the Divine Runic Master and guarantee that they had more energy to invest into the final stage of the drawing. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1601, Havoc Flame Symbol. Chapter 1601, Havoc Flame Symbol. A Havoc Flame symbol was formed from more than 800 tiny runes, and each tiny rune had its own profound structure. In order to draw one up, one had to have excellent attainments in the Divine Runic Arts, and the Divine Runic Master had to have a thorough understanding of the fire laws. When the Havoc Flame symbol was activated, it would erupt with an annihilating flame that could melt away mountains and evaporate rivers. This required that the Divine Runic Master have an understanding of the fire laws that reached the 6th level concept. This was also another reason that Lin Ming chose the Havoc Flame symbol. If he drew this symbol up, then he would have a natural advantage over others because his fire laws already touched upon the 7th level concept. Although he was inferior to Xiao Moxian, his understanding was still superior to that of most ordinary fire attribute ordinary world kings. Lin Ming had originally inherited Torch River's memories, and with his extraordinary soul force, understanding of the Asura Heavenly Tao, and deep understanding of the fire laws, he was able to easily draw up the first Havoc Flame symbol. After undergoing a few problems, Lin Ming quickly produced a successful result. The palm-sized Divine Runic symbol in his hand had a warm atmosphere to it. This Havoc Flame symbol was already successfully drawn up and matched every standard. As long as Lin Ming could draw up 19 more than he could complete the mission. But Lin Ming didn't plan to do so. Even if he completed the mission and obtained 50,000 to 60,000 contribution points, then that was still meaningless. It was simply far too small a number. He held on to the Havoc Flame symbol and walked out of the Divine Runic symbol drawing room. "Sir, may I help you?" The young receptionist who had helped Lin Ming before bowed as she saw him, sweetly smiling. Towards this wealthy young Divine Runic Master who also had outstanding looks, it was inevitable that a young girl like her would develop a good impression. "I need an array formation to test the power of a Divine Runic symbol." "Of course." The young receptionist smiled. "All Divine Runic Masters that have rented our rooms may use our test array formation at no cost." The young receptionist led Lin Ming to another room. This room was completely sealed off, and the walls and floor were all especially supported with array formations. In addition to the power of space locked in here, even a tremendously powerful Divine Runic symbol would find it hard to destroy this place. The young girl pointed to a platform in the center. This was where the test array formation was. Lin Ming took the Havoc Flame symbol and stepped onto the platform. The young receptionist politely drew back. All Divine Runic Masters were sensitive about their inheritances and kept them strictly confidential. It wasn't good manners to look at their experiments. As the young girl left, Lin Ming started the array formation. This array formation was in itself an illusory magic array. When Lin Ming activated the array formation, his surroundings changed and several ancient great desolate beasts appeared. These great desolate beasts were simulations created by the array formation. As they appeared, they turned to Lin Ming and savagely roared as if they wanted to eat him whole. Facing these vicious beasts, Lin Ming slowly lifted the Havoc Flame symbol. Flooding the Havoc Flame symbol with his true essence, hundreds of tiny runes shimmered together. A destructive power erupted from the Havoc Flame symbol, and with an explosive sound the several ancient desolate beasts were swept up in the waves of flames, many of the beasts turning to ash. Some were severely wounded, but some only suffered minor injuries. There was even one that wasn't affected at all. Who? The illusory magic array vanished and all the ancient desolate beasts disappeared. Lin Ming stepped down from the platform. The light from the array disc flashed, producing an evaluation of Lin Ming's Divine Runic symbol. Power, Holy Lord, injury level, 1 star. Lin Ming had inherited the memories of 3 Divine Runic Masters, thus he naturally knew what this evaluation meant. A Holy Lord injury level evaluation meant that this Havoc Flame symbol could heavily wound or even kill a Holy Lord level martial artist. And Holy Lord level injuries were divided into 5 magnitudes. A Holy Lord 1 star was the worst magnitude possible. Only a Holy Lord 1 star, it's a bit weak. Lin Ming shook his head, not too satisfied with this injury level. With his understanding of the 7th level fire laws, his strength as a 5th grade Divine Runic Master, and also his comprehensions of the Asura Heavenly Tao, the Divine Runic symbol he drew up was only able to severely wound the weakest of Holy Lords. He wasn't content with this result at all. But, if any other Divine Runic Masters were to hear Lin Ming's thoughts now, all of them might die from vomiting blood. In the domain of Divine Runic Arts, a 6th grade Divine Runic Master was equivalent to a World King, a 5th grade Divine Runic Master was equivalent to a Holy Lord, and a 4th grade Divine Runic Master was equivalent to a Divine Lord. Lin Ming had drawn up a peak 4th grade Divine Runic symbol. Ordinarily this level should be able to heavily injure a late Divine Lord or wound a half-step Holy Lord. But now it was already exaggerated that Lin Ming's Havoc Flame symbol had reached a Holy Lord 1 star injury level. Most importantly, this was the first time that Lin Ming had drawn it up. How could anyone still live upon hearing this? Lin Ming recalled that brilliant detonation of flames. In that explosion of flames, Lin Ming had carefully observed the entire process of how the energy within the Havoc Flame symbol interacted with the Asura Heavenly Tao. He discovered many places where the flow of energies didn't harmonize. The divine runic master who invented the Havoc Flame symbol in the past simply didn't understand the Asura Heavenly Tao. Rather, he had used his accumulated experiences to create the Havoc Flame symbol. Now, to Lin Ming's eyes, there were many holes in the process where the Havoc Flame symbol had fused with the Asura Heavenly Tao. If these holes were fixed, then the Havoc Flame symbol would undergo a massive transformation. As for what this transformation would end up like, Lin Ming wasn't able to estimate it at all. Lin Ming would have to finish patching all of these holes before he could further render judgment. With these thoughts in mind, Lin Ming stepped out of the test room. He didn't even hear when the young receptionist greeted him. He had completely immersed himself in his own world. At novel being at. After returning to his divine runic arts room, Lin Ming began the process of deduction. He closed his eyes, meditating with the Asura Sutra in mind. The Asura Sutra was the most current cultivation method of all the ones that Lin Ming possessed. Its grade was at least at the peak true divinity realm, or possibly even surpassed the boundary of a true divinity. Even though this cultivation method was still incomplete, the power behind it was incomprehensible. To be more exact, describing the Asura Sutra as a cultivation method wasn't wholly accurate. The Asura Sutra should be called a set of laws. These were laws that the Asura Road Master created and stood outside the laws of the 33 heavens. It was the 34th Heavenly Tao law that stood on equal footing with the laws of the 33 heavens. The Asura Heavenly Tao was complex and difficult to understand. The innumerable patterns were ever-changing and impossibly complex. To repair the problems within the Havoc Flame symbol would be easier said than done. Lin Ming took out several dozen jade slips, recording all of his calculations within them. It was impossible to write down the structural patterns of the Heavenly Tao laws in a journal like mortals did. These different structural patterns had energy transformations that were complex to the extreme. All of these transformations needed to be felt with one's sense, and then engraved onto a jade slip. Like this, Lin Ming lost himself in deducing the Asura Heavenly Tao. He compared the Asura Heavenly Tao laws with the tiny runes in the Havoc Flame symbol, modifying all the areas that were in disharmony. From time to time, Lin Ming needed to use materials to draw up tiny runes and test the effects of the modifications. But in most situations, there would be new problems with the modifications Lin Ming made. Sometimes the entire structure of tiny runes would collapse due to the instability of the energy. To make these sorts of deductions was far too much work. Lin Ming's current understanding of the Asura Heavenly Tao, when compared to other divine runic masters, could be called the difference between clouds and mud. But compared to the entire Asura Heavenly Tao, what Lin Ming understood was only the tip of the iceberg. He was far from being sufficient. This also caused many new problems to occur as Lin Ming was modifying the Havoc Flame symbol. His understanding of the laws was too lacking. Peng. Another brilliant burst of flames appeared in front of Lin Ming. The several dozen tiny runes he drew up exploded, indicating that new problems occurred in the revisions Lin Ming had just made. This situation had already occurred countless times. The results that he had carefully calculated again and again were proven wrong during experimentation and had to be redone once more. This sort of frustration couldn't be tolerated by most people. However, Lin Ming's patience and stubbornness far surpassed that of others. With every wrong calculation he would begin anew, making deduction after deduction until he made it right. Like this, Lin Ming made deductions through the day and night. He had already achieved a wholly absorbed state, not eating food or drinking any water. It was only when Lin Ming completely exhausted his soul force that he stopped. Then, he revolved the Divine Mist Heart mantra, restoring his soul force and beginning once again. Soon, 10 days passed in an instant. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Martial World. Chapter 1602 Sui's Troubles. Chapter 1602 Sui's Troubles. In his high degree of concentration, Lin Ming simply didn't feel time pass by. It was only when he reached into his spatial ring with his sense to take out several materials for more verifications did he discover there was nothing there. Lin Ming was stunned. Then he realized he had used up all the materials he purchased. Originally, when Lin Ming was at Sui's counter he had purchased enough materials to create 20 Havoc Flame symbols. But now, because he had been experimenting with all these materials and he would have to throw out the materials after every failure, this quick consumption caused him to use up all his materials for Havoc Flame symbols in just 10 days. If I knew this I would have bought more. Lin Ming shook his head and walked out of his divine runic arts room. After 10 days of continuous calculations, because Lin Ming had continually overdrawn his soul force, his eyes were bloodshot, his hair was messy, and he appeared haggard. With this sort of grubby appearance, it contrasted sharply with divine runic masters that paid such great attention to their image. As Lin Ming walked, many divine runic masters looked at him with strange and surprised eyes, as if they had seen some ugly monster walking before them. Lin Ming ignored them all. He arrived at the mission hall and placed 2 9 sun jades on the counter of the temporary material area, saying, Havoc Flame symbol material, 100 portions. This temporary material area was especially established to help divine runic masters complete their missions. The materials inside were jointly provided by the Extreme Star Holy Lands and the Divine Runic Masters Guild. As for the price of materials, they were lower than market price. This was also the Extreme Star Holy Lands' desire to encourage Divine Runic Masters to complete the missions they took up. Although the Extreme Star Holy Lands was a peak Empire-ian influence, their consumption of resources during war was terrifying and their materials storehouse wasn't too abundant. And now, Lin Ming had come to buy materials for 100 symbols. The person in charge of this material area certainly wasn't willing to sell them to Lin Ming. The amount of materials stored here was on a blade's edge. How could he endure it if these materials were wasted by others or they were taken out to be sold at an even lower price? Why do you want so many materials for drawing havoc flame symbols? The person in charge of the material area asked. He was a dark and thin middle-aged man from the Extreme Star Holy Lands. To complete a mission and do some research while I'm at it. Lin Ming calmly replied. Research. The dark and thin middle-aged man frowned. My apologies, but our materials are not for you to research with, but to help you aid the war front. These materials all have the potential to save a martial artist's life. If you do not have a mission scroll, then we cannot provide materials to you. Lin Ming's mission only required him to draw up 20 symbols, but now he actually wanted to buy materials for another 100 of them. The materials center wasn't willing to sell the materials to him. This caused Lin Ming to frown. If he went to other places to buy materials, it didn't matter too much if they were more expensive. The problem here was that he would have to go to many places to buy these materials, and Lin Ming's mind was currently filled with charts and diagrams of deductions of the Asura Heavenly Tao. Once his concentration was interrupted, then he would lose any inspirations he had. The loss would be tremendous. Lin Ming said, I don't need to buy at reduced prices. I will buy according to market price. Lin Ming said, making a concession. Because of the war, the market price for these materials had sharply risen. If Lin Ming wanted to buy at market price, he would have to pay 50% more origin energy symbols for these materials. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment. He said, I'll ask for you. He pulled out a sound-transmitting talisman and reported this matter to Suya. Even though the market price for these materials was rising day after day, these materials also became increasingly scarce. Even if it were at market price, the Extreme Star Holy Lands still didn't want to sell them. To this middle-aged man's report, Suya's answer was extremely cold. She seemed to have many thoughts weighing down her mind and couldn't summon any interest to care about this sort of trivial matter. She faintly said, just let him do as he wishes. He is someone that Elder Xu recognizes, and there must be some reason this is so. Although I don't see it, perhaps he might have a chance of becoming an outstanding Divine Runic Master in the future. Although materials were scarce, the amount of materials that Lin Ming alone could use up was limited. Suya was disinclined to haggle over this chump change. After Suya responded, the middle-aged man immediately began to ready the materials. Without speaking further, Lin Ming took out more 9 sun jades and exchanged them for the materials. Then he left, returning to his Divine Runic Arts room. Seeing Lin Ming leave, the middle-aged man made another report to Suya. However, Suya didn't have the mind to listen to such minor matters. Today, she had received an Extreme Star command issued by the highest power of the Extreme Star Holy Lands, Extreme Star Heavenly Palace. Moreover, the one who issued this order was the Vice Palace Master, the second in command of the entire Extreme Star Holy Lands, as well as an Empire-ian level character. With this Extreme Star command, a mission was passed down to Suya that she felt was nearly impossible to complete. In half a year, she had to quickly transport 80,000 4th-grade Divine Runic symbols and 10,000 5th-grade Divine Runic symbols to the warfront. A Divine Runic symbol was an extremely expensive consumable treasure. When a martial artist fought for months at a time, they might use up 4 or 5 Divine Runic symbols. This was also under the assumption that the martial artists of the Extreme Star Holy Lands would save any Divine Runic symbols they had until they absolutely had to use them. In fact, there were some soldiers that, because of their lack of Divine Runic symbols, would lose their lives in battles that they would have otherwise won. Thinking of this, Suya felt as if a great stone pressed down on her heart, making it hard for her to breathe. Military commands must be followed at all costs. If she failed in her mission, then she would be punished by the palace rules. 80,000 4th-grade Divine Runic symbols. 10,000 5th-grade Divine Runic symbols, and only half a year to complete this mission. Just how can I possibly accomplish this? Suya reclined in her chair, her heart racing with anxiety. Ever since the outbreak of war earlier in the year, she felt that the weight on her shoulders had been far too heavy. Before this, she had put forth a proposal to increase the mission rewards to incentivize the Divine Runic Masters. But, this proposal was immediately rejected by Extreme Star Heavenly Palace. The reasoning was simple: every point that the Extreme Star Holy Lands rewarded was exchanged with the Divine Runic Masters Guild through resources. The Extreme Star Holy Lands was a top Empire-ian influence with a legacy of 1 billion years. It was a massive organization with many assets and sources of income, but in this war, the consumption of all resources in every aspect was astronomical. It would be difficult for the Extreme Star Holy Lands to continue consuming resources at an even higher rate. Without more points as a reward, it would be difficult for Suya to complete her mission. However, her complaints fell on deaf ears. To her, the commands of Extreme Star Heavenly Palace were ironclad. They responded to her, if we could increase the point rewards however much we wanted, what would we still need you for? These words left Suya feeling especially weak. With such a pressing mission weighing down on her, could she actually be forced to sell her body to complete it? However, to those in power, whether it was an individual's body or life, everything they had was insignificant compared to the entire war situation. At this time within the Divine Runic Arts room, Lin Ming naturally didn't know about the difficult position Suya had been placed in, nor did he care. He was completely immersed in altering the Havoc Flame symbol. At novel bean at. This extremely intense work caused Lin Ming to neglect eating and sleeping. He made countless deductions and failed countless experiments. On the Divine Runic table in front of Lin Ming, there was a large pile of jade slips that he used to deduce and analyze the structures of the Asura Heavenly Dao. It had to be known that these jade slips had an extremely large capacity to store information. But, they were completely filled with Lin Ming's observations and experimentations of the tiny rune structures. From this it could be seen how many calculations Lin Ming had done. Through these nights and days of experimentations, Lin Ming couldn't sense the passing of time. Without noticing it, 40 days passed. Lin Ming's face was haggard and his eyes were bloodshot. In front of him were scattered scraps of materials as well as haphazardly dumped divine runic symbols. All of these divine runic symbols were defective products. Lin Ming had used nearly 2 months of time to try transforming the Havoc Flame symbol so that it conformed to the Asura Heavenly Dao. But, he failed countless times. With every defeat he tried again. But in the end, he still wasn't able to succeed. Lin Ming felt as if he had no more strength within him. After continuously failing again and again, no matter how much resolve Lin Ming had, he would still feel tired and annoyed. Now, he had been stuck on a single problem for a full 10 days. He was unable to draw up the fire energy in a way that agreed with the revolution of the Asura Heavenly Dao. And this time, Lin Ming's 100 portions of materials had been almost used up again. He still had to buy materials and he hadn't even succeeded in earning any money yet. All of this cost him a considerable amount of his remaining wealth. Lin Ming couldn't help but ruefully smile. 3 billion points wasn't easy to earn. Even if he had many advantages that others didn't, it still wasn't enough. Just as he opened the doors of the Divine Runic Arts room, Lin Ming was met with Xiao Moxian walking in. She was carrying a bowl of soup in her hands. Although Lin Ming didn't need to eat anything, he had still used up his soul force and energy and needed to supplement it. This soup that Xiao Moxian carried in was made with dozens of types of medicinal soul materials and was one of the highly praised dishes of the Divine Runic Master community. After drinking it, one could speed up the recovery of their soul force and nourish their spiritual sea. The effects were extremely good. Correspondingly, the price of this soup was high and the cooking process was extremely troublesome. Because Lin Ming had wholeheartedly studied the Havoc Flame symbol, Xiao Moxian had been worried over Lin Ming's ghastly appearance and forgetfulness in eating. Thus, she had learned some recipes from old Xu and this was the 3rd time she had brought a bowl of soup to Lin Ming. Seeing Xiao Moxian appear at this time, Lin Ming felt a sense of warmth surge in his heart. A great deal of the frustration he accumulated from his failures also disappeared. Xiona, it's fine for you to focus on your own cultivation, there is no need for you to waste your time making soup for me. I'm fine. Look at you, you've already become a beggar. Xiao Moxian reprimanded as she laid down the bowl of soup. Of course, she was only casually speaking and she knew that trying to change Lin Ming's mind on this matter was useless. Moreover, overdrawing his soul force might not be bad for Lin Ming. With the Divine Mist heart mantra that Empire and Divine Mist had passed down, after one overdrew their soul force they could restore it again to full, allowing one's soul force to stably grow. Xiao Moxian lightly lifted the lid of the bowl and blew a deep breath over it. As Lin Ming looked at Xiao Moxian's gentle figure and her slender white hands, he unknowingly became lost in thought. Xiao Moxian saw Lin Ming staring at her in a daze and was somewhat embarrassed. Just as she was about to say something, Lin Ming suddenly raised his fists and shouted out in surprise, I've got it. What? Xiao Moxian said, puzzled. I figured it out. I figured out how to solve the problem. Lin Ming was shaking with excitement, but Xiao Moxian actually puffed out her cheeks, her face blushing red. You are really, really, crazy. Tip, you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters.
good bunch of things for you this fine day.
Good thought.
mention what a bore you can be.
Lead the way to glory.
That needs to recharge.